Chapter 18. Colin did not think that he was a saint at all. However, he did not expect to meet someone like that. However, this was not surprising at all. Although Vera was very powerful, she was still young after all. Moreover, she spent most of her time studying arcana in the VL Tower. She had not experienced the cruelty of the world yet. Therefore, it was understandable that she was naive and a saint. However, what made Colin feel helpless was that Knight Bliss was very clear that he should abandon these defeated soldiers. However, no matter how Colin persuaded him, the Knight of the House of St. Hilda refused to disobey Vera's will. This made Colin angry, but he was also somewhat puzzled. What was Vera's real identity? In Colin's opinion, Bliss's strength was already at the fourth step. A knight of that rank could definitely be considered a core member of the St. Hilda family. His status definitely wouldn't be low. So, why was he so obedient to this female mage and even willing to sacrifice his own life for her? If he did not know that the Duke of St. Hilda only had 3 sons and no daughters, Colin would have suspected that Vera was the daughter of the Duke. Although Colin was disappointed with the future of this team, he did not panic too much. After all, even if the wolf cavalry caught up with them, he could still pretend to be dead and escape. Presumably, there was no one in this world who was better at pretending to be dead than him. Colin was very confident about this. As for the others, they could only pray for their own good. There was nothing he could do. For the next 2 days, everything was still calm. There were no trolls chasing after them, and they did not even encounter any bandits. On the contrary, they encountered several waves of defeated soldiers who had escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield. Of course, Vera did not hesitate to accept them. This time, the cavalry team, which was originally less than 100 people, quickly expanded to more than 1,000 people. Although the number of people increased, anyone with a little bit of military knowledge would know that their combat strength did not increase by much. When marching to war, more people was not always better, especially when there was a strategic shift. It was obvious that Vera did not have any military knowledge at all. However, under Sar's persuasion and flattery, she became more and more confident when she saw the number of people in the team increase. She even had the absurd idea of continuing to gather the defeated soldiers and fight to the death with the troll demons. However, other than these bad things, there was also good news. The recent wave of defeated soldiers told them that after the giant demon army defeated Marquis Charles, they took the opportunity to chase after him to the north. Therefore, the area around Mirror Lake was actually safe. This news caused everyone to cheer and jump for joy. In this way, the only thing left for the fleeing team to face was the wolf cavalry that was chasing them. Although the wolf riders had misjudged the direction they were going to break out of the encirclement, they should have figured it out by now after so many days. According to Colin's thinking, the most sensible thing to do now was to abandon the scattered soldiers and continue north before the wolf cavalry caught up. They would then find and hide in the nearest human town. Instead of continuing to receive the scattered soldiers like this, which would slow down the marching speed and allow the wolf cavalry to catch up again. The development of the situation was just as Colin had expected. After another 2 days, the traces of the giant demon cavalry were finally found behind the fleeing team. Young Master Colin, I am afraid that the wolf cavalry from before will catch up with us soon. Why don't we quickly leave the team and escape on our own? Raymond apparently realized that something was wrong and quietly suggested to Colin. Colin was not panicking now. He even wanted to see what would happen to this group of people who did not listen to his advice. Perhaps, there would be a chance to get the blood of Knight Bliss and Mage Vicky. In this regard, Colin did not feel much guilt. This was because he did not deliberately murder the 2 of them for the sake of blood. On the contrary, he had already warned them earlier, but these people insisted on seeking their own deaths. Therefore, he had no choice but to adhere to the principle of not wasting and make use of the waste. But Colin glanced at Raymond, who was beside him. For this loyal knight, he did not want him to die here. You run on your own, I still have to, young master. If you don't leave, I will never leave. Obviously, Raymond misunderstood the meaning of Colin's words. However, Colin did not know how to explain it. After all, he could not tell Raymond that he was very good at pretending to be dead. Just as Colin was thinking about how to persuade the stubborn Raymond to leave, a soldier ran over to him and said, "Sir Colin, Sir Bliss has asked you to come over." Colin had no choice but to temporarily calm down and follow the soldier to a tent in the center of the camp. In the tent, in addition to Vera and Bliss, the filial son Sar was also there. In the past few days, Sar had obviously become Vera's henchman by virtue of his excellent eloquence, clever mind, and flattering attitude. Colin could not help but admire Sar's methods of currying favor. However, at the same time he also felt disgusted with this annoying guy. "Night, Colin, you are here." Vera smiled and nodded at Colin. It seemed that there was no estrangement between them because of the previous dispute about receiving the defeated soldiers. Bliss still nodded indifferently. Sar bowed and greeted Jiang Yuning with a warm smile on his face. "I did not expect to see you again, dear Sir Khan, Pa." Colin immediately lashed out with the whip in his hand, interrupting the filial son's words. "Night, Colin, what are you doing?" Vera was startled by this sudden turn of events and immediately questioned him. Colin sneered and pointed at Sar, who was lying on the ground. "Mercenary boy, remember my name, Colin Angeli." Sar was obviously stunned by Colin's whip. At this time, he still did not understand how the previous Consudo had become Colin Angeli. However, the burning pain on his body reminded him of what he should do. "I am sorry, dear Sir Colin. I have remembered wrongly." As a civilian, Sar could not question a noble, even if the noble had indeed lied. "Your punishment is to lead Knight Colin's horse." Vera, who felt that she had figured out the cause of the matter, snorted softly and didn't blame Colin anymore. She even felt that the punishment of one whip was a little light. In this hierarchical world, if a commoner called a noble by the wrong name, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he would be hanged. On the surface, Colin looked furious, but on the inside he was secretly laughing to vent his anger. He had been unhappy with this filial son for a long time, and he wanted to take this opportunity to take revenge. Of course, he could also prevent the other party from revealing that he had used a fake name before. "Well, Knight Colin, this time we have called you here to discuss the direction of our next move. I think you should know that the wolf cavalry is catching up with us again." In the face of Vera's question, Colin did not answer immediately. Instead, he ordered Sar, who was still kneeling on the ground, "Get out of here first." Sar quietly clenched his fist, but he did not dare to refute Colin. Instead, he looked at Vera for help. However, he obviously overestimated his position in Vera's heart. "Sar, you can leave now." Yes. Sar had to get up and leave. However, at the same time he lowered his head deeply, not wanting to let anyone see the anger in his eyes. Chapter 19. Why are you targeting a small mercenary like him? After Sar left, Vera asked in a mischievous tone. Obviously, Vera could also see the hostility that Colin had towards Sar. However, she thought that the two of them were just jealous of each other because of her. As she thought of this, her small face that was covered by the black veil blushed a little. However, she could not help but feel a little happy in her heart. A woman always liked to see men fighting for her, even if she did not like any of those men. "A person who dares to kill his own father is not worthy of my respect," Colin said righteously, and he did not hesitate to expose Sar's background. "What?" Vera was very surprised. "Indeed, Sar is a poisonous snake. We need to be careful," Bliss said. This knight obviously looked down on this filial son who had killed his own father. "I understand," Vera nodded, and she blacklisted this small mercenary who she thought was a little clever. "Well, let's get back to the main topic." Vera began to introduce the specific situation that the Sentinel Knight had found out to Colin. At this time, they were certain that there were two groups of wolf cavalry that had caught up with them. Each group was about 700 to 800 people. The total number of wolf cavalry was almost the same as the current number of people on their side. However, the other party was the most elite wolf cavalry in the troll army. On the other hand, except for the less than 100 elite cavalrymen, the rest of the wolf cavalry were all defeated soldiers who had escaped from the Mirror Lake camp. Moreover, these defeated soldiers were all mercenaries and civilians who had been temporarily recruited by the emergency conscription order. They were completely a group of motley crew. Under such circumstances, even Vera, who did not have any military knowledge, began to panic. Therefore, she quickly looked for Colin to discuss countermeasures. Colin sighed and made a last effort. If we abandon the defeated soldiers now, we will still be able to escape with the cavalry. Isn't there a better way? Vera was still unwilling to give up. In Colin's opinion, the female mage's kindness was misused. He could only persuade her once more. I know you don't want to abandon them, but even if we stay, we won't be able to save them. We'll only lose our lives. Vera did not say anything, but the look in her eyes was still as stubborn as ever. Colin could only turn his head to look at Bliss, hoping that this battle-hardened knight could be more rational. However, Knight Bliss's eyes were filled with determination. I was the one who dragged these people into this battle. I've already abandoned them once. I don't want to abandon them a second time. At this time, Colin finally realized that Bliss had not agreed to accept the defeated soldiers because of Vera's order. Instead, he had agreed to accept the defeated soldiers because he felt guilty. Although in Colin's opinion he was only acting on the Marquis' orders and could not be considered his fault. Looking at the determined Knight Bliss, Colin sighed in his heart. He knew very well that once a determined person like Bliss had made up his mind, it would be very difficult for him to be persuaded by others. However, Knight Bliss was also very clear that this time, they were really doomed. Therefore, he looked straight into Colin's eyes and pleaded with him in a serious manner. Knight Colin, I hope that you can take Miss Vera with you and leave first. No. I will not leave. Vera refused immediately. Miss Vera, I will not leave. These are my people and I have the responsibility to protect them. The atmosphere suddenly became emotional. Colin felt a headache coming on and he felt as though he was watching a melodramatic drama. However, he was surprised when he heard Vera say the word, my people, in a hurry. Only a member of the St. Hilda house would have the right to say something like that, and a direct descendant at that. However, the Duke of St. Hilda did not have a daughter. Was she an illegitimate daughter? Colin thought about it again. Although the aristocratic laws in this world were very similar to the Middle Ages on Earth, there were still some differences. In this world, illegitimate children had absolutely no right to inherit. The aristocrats here were particularly obsessed with the purity of their bloodline. Even if all the children of the direct line died, the aristocrats would rather choose an heir from the collateral line of the family than pass the title to an illegitimate child. Therefore, even if Vera was really the illegitimate daughter of the Dukes of the North, she was not qualified to say the words, my people. Just as Colin was thinking about Vera's true identity, the argument between the two men in front of him also subsided. Unsurprisingly, Bliss failed to persuade Vera to leave first. Although she was a little bit naive, the female mage had indeed shown admirable courage. There was a moment of silence in the tent. After a long time, Bliss suddenly spoke. Knight Colin, you should leave this place. Presumably, you have already heard from Knight Raymond that your father, Baron Angeli, has died in the battle. Therefore, you need to go back and inherit the title. Colin suddenly raised his head and looked at Bliss's expressionless face. He asked slightly abruptly, why hasn't this news been sent back to the Kingdom of Grey Castle? Bliss hesitated for a moment, but he still told the truth. Since the end of last year, the Marquis has ordered to block all news from the front line. Bliss did not answer. However, Colin could guess the answer. It was because the situation at the front line had taken a turn for the worse since then. Marquis Charles had the motive to block the news, whether it was to protect his face or to prevent the people at the rear from wavering. However, he probably did not know that such a move had indirectly caused the death of Colin's predecessor, Charles St. Hilda. Colin had already secretly bore a grudge against this name. Knight Colin, you should go back to the Kingdom of Grey Castle first. They need you there. Vera was obviously hearing the news for the first time. She immediately sympathized with Colin and wanted to persuade him to leave first. However, Colin put on an impassioned posture and righteously refused. I will not leave either. Whether it is to avenge my father or to protect the glory of the human race, I must stay and fight with the trolls. Of course, Colin would not leave at this time. However, it was not because of any high-sounding reasons, but because he did not want to waste the blood of a high-level knight and mage, Colin. Vera's beautiful big eyes were full of splendor. You are a real knight. Even Bliss was moved, as if he suddenly looked at Colin with new eyes. The three of them looked at each other for a long time, and the atmosphere in the tent was filled with the atmosphere of sacrifice. Unfortunately, what Vera and Bliss did not know was that Colin was already thinking about how to pretend to be dead. When the three of them gradually calmed down, they finally began to discuss countermeasures. Since they had already decided on the principle of not abandoning, not giving up, then with so many burdens, it was only a matter of time before the wolf cavalry caught up to them. A battle was inevitable. Bliss first began to talk about his battle plan, where to meet the enemy, how to build a simple fortification, how to cooperate with the cavalry and infantry, and so on. Vera listened attentively. However, only God knew how much this female mage, who lacked military knowledge, understood. Colin listened absent-mindedly, as if he was thinking about something else. Knight Colin, Knight Colin? What? Colin came back to his senses and saw that the two people opposite him were staring at him. Do you have any other opinions about this battle plan? Colin did not answer this question. Instead, he said, Sorry, I was absent-minded just now. I was thinking that maybe we might be able to avoid this battle. Really? Vera asked hopefully. She did not want to be a martyr unless she had no other choice. Moreover, the previous successful breakthrough gave her confidence and made her think that Colin might be able to create another miracle. Colin unhurriedly drew a simple map on the ground with his horsewhip and then gently pointed at a bend in the river. We will hide here. Chapter 20. At the first glimmer of dawn, the group began to pack up and prepare to set off. As the wolf cavalry drew closer and closer, restlessness began to spread amongst the fleeing group. Sar stuffed the remaining half of the hare he had eaten yesterday into his robes, ignoring his companion who was constantly muttering to himself. Instead, he looked around the camp, searching for that beautiful figure. Very quickly, Sar locked onto his target. Unfortunately, there was another man standing next to that figure. Sar touched the left side of his face. The whip mark was still throbbing. His companion Pam looked at Sar, who was in a daze, and could not help but snicker. Sar, stop looking. That noble young lady is not someone a commoner like you can get close to. Who said that a mercenary can't like a noble young lady? Sar retorted impatiently. Haha, do you really understand the difference in status between a commoner and a noble? Silly boy. Don't call me silly boy again. Sar turned back and glared at Pam. All right. Pam shrank back in fear, hurriedly begging for mercy. Only then did Sar let him off. His gaze once again followed that figure, and he said in a deep voice, Pam, do you know Count Amon? Of course, he's the Lord of Fallen Eagle City. That's right. Then do you know how Count Amon's title came about? Wasn't it passed down from his father? Yes. Then, do you know how his father's title came about? His grandfather passed it down. Pam felt that this question was rather silly. Sar shook his head slowly. It was passed down from his grandmother to his father. So? Pam scratched his bird nest-like hair, confusion written all over his face. Why was it passed down from his grandmother and not his grandfather? Sar's eyes flashed with a strange light, because Count Amon's grandfather was actually a commoner mercenary. How is that possible? Pam exclaimed. But that's the truth. Earl Amon's grandfather married the daughter of the former Lord of Fallen Eagle City as a mercenary. Later, the son of the Lord of Fallen Eagle City died, and the title was passed down to Earl Amon's grandmother, and then to the Earl's father, the son of that mercenary. Pam opened his mouth wide as if he was listening to a fairy tale. Sar's eyes flashed with a strange light. It was something called ambition. He moved closer to Pam and lowered his voice as if he was making an oath. So, the son of a mercenary can also become a noble. With that, Sar strode towards the figure. Pam stared blankly at his companion's tall back with mixed feelings. However, what Sar didn't tell Pam was that the mercenary who married the Count's daughter was a ranked 6 warrior, and also the president of the Northern Frontier Mercenary Guild. Back then, he was known as the strongest person below the sanctuary realm. "Good morning, Miss Vera." "Good morning, Knight Colin. Please allow me to lead your horse for you as an apology for offending you yesterday." Colin looked at the obedient mercenary in front of him and felt annoyed. He waved his hand as if he was waving away a fly. "No need. Are you unwilling to accept my apology?" Sar immediately put on an aggrieved look, and then deliberately revealed the left side of his face. There was still a trace of blood on the whip mark on his face. "Colin, a real knight should know how to forgive." Vera seemed to be deceived by the mercenary's pitiful appearance, and she actually spoke up to help him. Sar was happy, but at the same time he felt pain in his heart. He was happy that Miss Vera spoke up to help him out. He felt pain because she actually called Colin by his name without adding the suffix knight. This was an extremely intimate way of addressing him. She was too unreserved. "No, I just think that it is a waste to ask the leader of the Firefox mercenaries to lead my horse. In fact, I have a more important task for you, Commander Sar." "You think too highly of me." Sar instinctively felt that something was wrong. "But are you unwilling to help me?" Colin did not give the other party a chance to refuse. Of course, I am willing to help you. It would be my honor." Sar had to bite the bullet and agree, but he was already regretting it in his heart. "Very good." Colin grinned, revealing his sharp canine teeth. "In order to get rid of the pursuers behind us, we need to mislead them so that they will not be able to figure out our real movements. So, I will ask you to lead 50 people, pick the young, strong and fast, and move quickly all the way to the north. After about 20 to 30 kilometers, you will reach the bank of the Rapids River. At this time, you have to deliberately leave some traces of crossing the river to the north, but in fact, you don't really need to cross the river. You just need to quietly follow the Rapids River all the way to the east. After about 10 kilometers, you will meet up with us. Of course, when you go down the river, you have to eliminate the traces of your march. You can't attract the enemy. Do you understand?" Sar listened with cold sweat. He increasingly felt that Colin was using his position to get rid of him. You want me to be the bait?" "No, not the bait, but a decoy," Colin said seriously. "Moreover, we will cooperate with your actions. As long as you strictly follow my instructions, there will be no danger." "How to cooperate?" Sar was still not at ease. Colin suddenly frowned. If this was in the regular army, if Sar dared to ask such a question, the commander-in-chief could directly chop off his head. This was because the commander-in-chief had no obligation to explain his overall strategy to every general under him. After every general received a military order, they only needed to act according to the requirements of the military order. Instead of asking all sorts of questions, hesitating and being picky. Even if the commander-in-chief really gave you a suicidal mission, you could only carry it out. A military order was like a mountain. Even if it really wanted to crush you to death, you could not hide. Unconditional obedience was the first priority of a soldier. But clearly, a mercenary like Sar did not have the qualities of a true soldier. Colin was very helpless. He could only patiently explain. "Our cavalry will all spread out and search for the sentries of the wolf cavalry behind us. We will ensure that the enemy will not be able to see our specific movements in the next 1 or 2 days. So, as long as you hurry, you will not be caught." Sar thought for a moment, then asked, "So, your plan is for me to lead a small group to deliberately create the illusion of crossing the river to confuse the enemy, while the main force finds a place to hide?" "That's right." "Then how do you know the enemy will fall for it? No matter how carefully we clean up the traces of our march, as long as we investigate carefully, we will eventually find some clues. Because we will hide in a place that the enemy will never expect." "What place?" Colin gradually became impatient. "Mr. Sar, have you been to the Rapids River area before?" Then you will not understand." Colin gently squeezed the horse's belly and slowly moved forward. "Do as I say. When you reach the south bank of the Rapids River, make the illusion of crossing the river, and then follow the river all the way to the east. You will then meet up with the main force at the hiding place that I said. You will understand by then." "Knight Colin." Sar took a few steps forward and wanted to ask more questions. Mr. Sar, I believe that you will be able to complete this mission, right? Vera said gently. Sal immediately raised his head and puffed out his chest, patted it, and said loudly, "Of course. I will not let you down." Unfortunately, this little mercenary who was lost in Vera's charm couldn't see that Colin, who had taken a few steps forward with his back facing him, was revealing a mocking sneer. Chapter 21. Under the radiant glow of the setting sun, a group of people were following the rapid flow of the South River towards the east. They were walking very carefully, and they were cleaning up the traces behind them as they walked. "Sar, do you think we can fool the trolls like this?" Pam asked in a low voice as he patted his sore back. "I don't know," Sar replied with an impatient and disdainful look on his face. "You will have to ask Knight Colin about this." Of course, Pam did not dare to go. He was not as courageous as Sar. When he met a noble, he was just like a normal civilian. He would never be able to straighten his back. "Move faster, don't be lazy," Sar urged everyone. The west end of the river was connected to the Mirror Lake. The river was not wide, and the current was very fast. However, Sar was a very good swimmer. He looked at the river in front of him and felt that it should not be a problem for him to cross it. Therefore, the ambitious young mercenary's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. When the moon was in the middle of the sky, Sar finally led his team to meet up with the main force. He was secretly relieved. It seemed that Colin did not lie to him. He was not an abandoned person. However, Sar did not feel grateful to Colin. Instead, he looked at the knight who was standing on the shore talking and laughing with Vera. He felt even more resentment in his heart. In his opinion, since Colin had arranged such a mission, if it wasn't to frame him, then it must be to get him away from Vera's side. What a despicable knight. "Miss Vera, Knight Colin, I have completed the task according to your instructions." "Well done." Colin looked at Sar playfully. Then, he pointed at the river in front of him and asked, "Do you know why the flow of this river is so fast?" Sar looked at the river under the moonlight and suddenly realized that the flow of the river here was indeed faster than what he had seen upstream. But Sar began to feel uneasy. Colin traced the shape of the flowing river and drew a few words in the air. The Rapids River made a big turn here. Silt accumulated and the river channel became narrower. Of course, the speed of the water flow became faster. Colin pointed downstream and continued, "Moreover, after this sharp bend, there is a waterfall downstream." "Waterfall?" Sar exclaimed. His tone had changed. "Yes, a waterfall." Colin's smile was somewhat unpredictable. "The drop is about 70 to 80 meters. It's not too high, but it's high enough to kill someone." Sar's heart sank. "So, there is no way for us to cross the river from this part of the river, right?" Vera suddenly felt that she finally understood Colin's intention. "In addition, the river here is like a pocket, wrapping us up. The only way in and out is from the south. It's simply a hopeless situation. The trolls will definitely not expect us to hide in such a place, just like how they did not expect us to break through the encirclement in the north." "Smart," Colin praised with a smile. "The most dangerous place is the safest place." Vera's big eyes curved into a crescent moon. After being exaggerated by Colin, she seemed to feel that her military skills had greatly improved. But what if the trolls are not fooled?" Sar's voice trembled. "The possibility of this is very low." Colin looked at Sar deeply. "When they find the traces of you crossing the river upstream, they will inevitably think that that is the direction that we escaped in. All the traces that point to this bend will be suspected of being a trap." Vera began to patiently teach the young mercenary. "The trolls will definitely think that we are stupid enough to hide in a place where we can't escape. Therefore, when they cross the river in the wrong direction, we will be able to walk out of the bend safely and turn to the south." Vera was very excited. She felt that she had finally grasped the essence of war. She then looked at Colin expectantly, seeking approval from her teacher. Colin resisted the urge to laugh and nodded seriously to express his approval. Sar, who was standing at the side, had already turned pale. Fortunately, it was late at night and no one noticed this. Except for Colin. Mr. Sar, when you came from the upstream, did you follow my instructions and clean up the traces? Of course. Sar replied loudly. His slightly exaggerated performance made it seem like he was trying to cover it up in the eyes of those who were observant. However, Colin seemed to believe him. That's good. As long as you don't leave any obvious clues, you should be able to fool the trolls. That night, Sar tossed and turned in bed and could not sleep at all. Several times, he wanted to escape under the cover of the night, but he was worried that he would run into the trolls head-on. From time to time, he would curse Colin and complain about how the other party came up with such a stupid countermeasure. After a while, he began to regret it. He regretted that he thought that he was smart enough to do those little tricks when he went down the river. Of course, most of the time, he was thinking about Vera's graceful figure and fantasizing that he could persuade her so that she could use her magic to bring him across the moat in front of him and escape from this place of death. From then on, he would live a happy life without any shame. Sar. What happened? Sar opened his eyes in a daze. The fantasy of Miss Vera disappeared, leaving only Pam's black and ugly face in front of him. It's over. It's completely over. The trolls have discovered us and they are turning around and heading this way. Sar felt cold all over and the last trace of hope in his heart disappeared without a trace. At this time, Vera, Bliss and Colin were sitting opposite each other in the tent in the center of the campsite. What should we do now? Vera asked as she tried to suppress her trembling voice. The female sorceress had just thought that she had mastered the essence of war, but now, she was suddenly beaten back to her original state. Colin was not flustered at all. What is the specific situation that the scouts have discovered? Bliss was also calm as he replied, there are two groups of wolf cavalry. One of them is crossing the river upstream and the other is coming towards us along the river bank. It seems that the enemy is not sure if we are really hiding here. Colin smiled before he asked, how many people are there in the group of wolf cavalry? About 700 to 800 people. Then what are we waiting for? Colin spread out his hands. Then let's fight. But, Vera's eyes were full of panic. Although they had more people on their side, Vera knew that in terms of combat power, they were absolutely no match for the wolf cavalry. Although Vera was prepared to die generously when she decided not to abandon the defeated troops, she was still prepared to die. However, Colin's plan later gave her hope. If one had some understanding of psychology, they would know that once a person was determined to commit suicide, it would be difficult for him or her to muster up the courage to die even if the obstacle disappeared. Vera was in such a psychological state now. She hesitated and was afraid. On the other hand, Knight Bliss, who had been through many battles for a long time, had a much better mentality. He still had a cold expression on his face, as if nothing in this world could move him. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and asked, Knight Colin, did you expect this situation from the beginning? Chapter 22. Yes. Colin wanted to deny it, but he did not know why he chose to be honest with her. What? Vera's eyes widened, and she felt as if this was the first time she had seen the young knight in front of her. Then, what about the plan? We will make it look like we are crossing the river, but in fact, we will hide in the most dangerous part of the river. Didn't you say that the most dangerous place is the safest place? That was a lie. Colin looked into the female mage's eyes. We have already fooled those wolf riders once. How can they be fooled again so easily? Vera took a deep breath and gradually calmed down. She was not lacking in courage, and she only lost her composure because her hope of escaping was suddenly shattered. Why are you doing this? Vera had a complicated expression on her face. The glorious image that Colin had built in her heart was collapsing. We can't run away. Colin sighed and his tone gradually became cold. From the moment you made the decision not to abandon the defeated soldiers, you should have been aware of this. This is a battlefield of life and death. There is no room for mercy and innocence. Even if my plan deceives the soldiers and makes them think that we have really crossed the river and gone north, how long can we deceive them? They are wolf riders and we have a large group of infantry on our side. By the time they realize that something is wrong after crossing the river, It will only take them 1 or 2 days to catch up with us. We can't avoid this battle. Therefore, since we cannot avoid this battle, the only thing we can do is to choose the most advantageous location for the battle. Colin pointed his finger at his feet and said, "This is the most dangerous place, but it is also the place where we have the best chance of winning." But Vera felt that she could no longer trust Colin. Before Colin could answer, Bliss had already opened his mouth and said, "Because there is no way for us to escape from here." That's right. Colin took a deep look at Bliss. Only a rabbit that is forced into a corner will turn around and bite back. The same goes for those defeated soldiers. If we were to be caught by the wolf riders in the open, then without a doubt, as long as the enemy charges, the scattered soldiers we gathered would definitely collapse and scatter in all directions. Therefore, they had to ensure that they had nowhere to run. Since we don't want to abandon them, we can't let them abandon us. Either we win this battle or we die here together. Colin's powerful remarks made Vera feel very confused. She did not know how to evaluate the young knight in front of her. He didn't know if what he did was right or wrong. Whether it was her childhood in Winter City or her academic career in the Yule Tower, everything that Vera encountered was simple and beautiful. Of course, this was also because she was well protected due to her noble status. However, Vera knew a thing or two about evil. However, she had never met someone like Colin. A brave and fearless knight? A genius who was full of schemes? An elegant and polite gentleman? A devil who plays with people's hearts? Vera did not know which one was his real face. Or were these all fake? Compared to Vera, who had not fully matured yet, Bliss's reaction was much simpler. The experienced knight paid more attention to practical results. "Are you sure that your plan will work? You should know that Marquis Charles also had a similar plan." "Are you talking about the Battle of Mirror Lake?" Colin seemed to have known that Bliss would ask this question. "Yes, I have to admit that my plan was inspired by Marquis Charles," Colin said seriously. In fact, he had already rolled his eyes in his heart. Fighting with one's back to the river, cutting off all means of retreat, and so on were not new strategies in another time and space. However, it had never appeared in this time and space. Marquis Charles's arrangement at Mirror Lake was indeed a prototype of fighting with one's back to the river. However, in Colin's opinion, Marquis Charles's handling of the details was terrible. The details determined the success or failure of a battle. Similarly, Han Xen was able to fight with his back to the water in Jingxing, while Ma Su could only retreat in defeat and become a laughingstock for all eternity. Colin was confident that he would not become another Ma Su. Bliss obviously did not have such confidence, and he continued to ask coldly, "Marquis Charles's plan did not succeed at Mirror Lake. Why do you think that you can use a similar plan to succeed at the Rapids River?" "Because Marquis Charles made 2 big mistakes. First of all, his heart is not ruthless enough. Although the Mirror Lake camp is facing the river, it is not really a desperate situation. Just think about those defeated soldiers. Many of them had to jump into the lake to escape. Therefore, I chose this bend of the Rapids River. This place is surrounded by water on 3 sides and the water flow is rapid. There is a waterfall cliff downstream. There is no way to escape. Here they can only fight to the death." Bliss's expression changed slightly, and he continued to ask, "What about the second mistake?" Marquis Charles's second mistake is that he did not leave behind someone in the Mirror Lake camp who could lead the miscellaneous soldiers to fight to the death. Colin waved his hand at Bliss. "I am not saying that you are not qualified. Indeed, I am not qualified. Furthermore, I fled at the last moment." Bliss did not mind at all. Colin's admiration for this cold-faced knight grew. He nodded and continued speaking. He nodded and said, "Under the circumstances at that time, the Mirror Lake camp needed a noble with sufficient prestige, a lord with a title, to stabilize the miscellaneous soldiers who were recruited at the last minute and make them resist with all their might, causing enough trouble for the trolls. This way, Marquis Charles would lead the army to attack from behind the trolls. Only with a pincer attack would there be a chance of victory. Unfortunately, Marquis Charles did not leave behind someone of sufficient importance in the Mirror Lake camp, but we will not make such a mistake." After saying this, Colin stepped forward and approached Vera. He stared into her eyes and said, "So this time, I will stay at the river bend as the first heir of the Baron of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. I will live and die with the soldiers. Miss Vera, I don't know if you—" "Of course, I will also stay," Vera said without hesitation. At this time, she had decided to believe in Colin again. Of course, she had no other choice. In fact, everyone here had been plotted against by Colin. Colin nodded and turned to Bliss. "Knight Bliss, please lead the cavalry away from the river bend temporarily. When the trolls attack us, you will lead the army to attack from behind." Bliss's eyes flashed. "Why don't I stay at the river bend, and you lead the cavalry?" "No." Colin immediately rejected Bliss's proposal because he knew that Bliss was testing them. The people who stayed at the front of the battlefield would be in the most danger, but the one who led the cavalry would still have the possibility to escape. Therefore, in order to make Bliss believe in him, Colin had no choice but to choose to stay. "The people who stay at the river bend need to have enough weight. I am more suitable than you to stay. Moreover, the cavalry is your subordinate, and they will be able to fight better under your leadership." Bliss's eyes changed slightly, as if he finally recognized that Colin had passed his test, and he nodded in agreement. Then, Colin glanced at Vera. "I know that you have a noble status, so if you can reveal your true identity before the battle, then it will greatly encourage the soldiers. Of course, if you have any concerns, I will not force you." Vera was stunned, but she did not speak. Just when Colin thought that Vera was unwilling, he heard a clear and firm voice. "Okay." Chapter 23. Tada! As soon as Knight Bliss led the cavalry away from the river, the entire camp suddenly fell into a state of panic. The news that the troll cavalry was about to catch up with them had already spread. Everyone was already in a state of panic. Now that they thought that Bliss and the others had fled, it was as if they had poked a hornet's nest. Many people had already quietly gathered together, packed up their things, and were ready to escape. At this moment, Vera and Colin appeared in front of everyone and calmed them down temporarily. When they saw that the two nobles with the highest status in the entire camp had not left yet, everyone felt that there was still hope and that they had not been abandoned. However, the news that Knight Bliss had left and that the troll cavalry was approaching made everyone's faces full of anxiety. Everyone's nerves were stretched to the extreme, and they could not withstand any more stimulation. They stared at the figures of Vera and Colin closely, hoping to get some good news from them. Most of the civilians in this era were a group of confused lambs. They were ignorant, and timid. They were unable to control their own destiny, and they did not even dare to control their own destiny. Therefore, they put their own destiny in the hands of the nobles, hoping that the nobles would guide them to prosperity and glory. However, what they did not know was that the nobles' guidance often came at the price of slavery. At this time, Vera could see the confusion and desire in everyone's eyes. Of course, she would not let them down. She did not speak. It was just a simple action, but everyone in the camp was completely stunned. She lifted her veil. The first rays of the morning sun sprinkled down, outlining the beautiful face under the veil. Time seemed to have stopped. The restless crowd held their breaths at this moment. It was as if they were afraid to disturb the beautiful, determined, and slightly shy girl. However, before everyone could enjoy this beautiful scene, Vera spoke. Even the sound of the rushing river could not drown out her soft but steady voice. "My name is Vera St. Hilda, and I am the adopted daughter of the Duke of St. Hilda, the Lord of the Northern Frontier." Adopted daughter. So, she was the adopted daughter of the Dukes of the North. Colin's eyes widened, and there was a huge wave in his heart. One had to know that in this world, adopted children had the right of inheritance. Unlike those illegitimate children who were spurned by the nobles, adopted children were the legal heirs recognized by the Senate of the Empire. His right of inheritance was second only to that of the direct line of descent. Therefore, in order to become an adopted son or daughter of a noble, one must first have a pure and noble bloodline. If one of the parents was a commoner, then he or she could never be legally adopted by a noble. Secondly, if they wanted to adopt an heir, they had to pay an adoption tax to the Senate of the Imperium in exchange for the Senate's recognition of the adopted child. In order to prevent the nobles from abusing their adoption rights and disrupting the normal order of succession, the adoption tax was extremely high. Most lesser nobles would not be able to afford it even if they went bankrupt. Even for a great noble like the House of St. Hilda, paying an adoption tax would be painful for a long time. Therefore, the nobles were extremely cautious about adoption. Generally speaking, only those who were rich and did not have any children of their own would choose a descendant from the collateral branch of the family as their adopted child. This way, they could prevent their title from falling into the hands of someone they did not like. Colin did not understand why the Duke of St. Hilda, who had 3 sons, would adopt Vera and send Vera to Yevil to be trained as a mage. However, this did not affect Vera's position as the 4th heir of the Dukes of the North. This was the reason why Knight Bliss had pledged his loyalty to her. This was also the reason why she was qualified to say, "My people." Therefore, when she revealed her true identity at the bend of the Rapids River, the soldiers who were originally panicking were so shocked and excited. Most of them were already holding the hilts of their swords in their hands, ready to fight to the death for her. They were all waiting for her to say those words. "I know that all of you are very scared and panicked." Vera slowly swept her eyes across the crowd and looked at them one by one. "Me too. I am scared and panicked. However, I am not desperate. Even if there is no way out now. This is because I know that all of you will not abandon me. Just like how I did not abandon all of you in the first place. No matter how critical the situation is, I will always remember my mission and my duty to all of you. As the adopted daughter of the Duke of St. Hilda, I have sworn to protect the people of the northern frontier forever. As the people of the northern frontier, I also hope that all of you will have the courage to pick up your weapons and fight with me to protect the northern frontier against the invading enemies. I promise that I will fight with all of you until the last moment. For Miss Vera." Colin stood up and shouted at the top of his lungs. Originally, he had prepared a long speech and wanted to use his identity as the son of the Baron to win the hearts of the soldiers. However, it seemed that he did not need to do so anymore. He did not even need to emphasize his identity anymore. Vera's identity was more than enough to arouse the fighting spirit of this group of soldiers. The House of St. Hilda had ruled the northern frontier for thousands of years and its prestige was unparalleled. Vera's noble identity, her beautiful face, and the kindness that she had shown throughout her journey had made her a goddess in the hearts of these soldiers. They would never allow those dirty and ugly trolls to blaspheme this goddess, even if they had to pay the price with their lives. For Miss Vera. For Miss Vera. Fight to the death. Fight to the death. Rumble. A flash of lightning tore through the sky, followed by the roar of thunder. The rising sun did not even have time to wake up the sleeping earth before it was covered by dark clouds. At the bend of the Rapids River, the human soldiers were already waiting. They held their breaths as they looked straight ahead, allowing the raindrops to fall on their bodies. They were motionless like statues. The rain was gradually getting heavier. The wind was also gradually getting stronger. A gray line appeared on the horizon and quickly spread out like a raging tide, sweeping towards the human camp at the bend of the river. Awoo! The troll cavalry was here. Kill! For Miss Vera. For Miss Vera. Facing the terrifying troll cavalry, the human soldiers burst out with courage that was not inferior to the elite soldiers of the army. This was because they knew that there was no way out for them. Since there was no way out, they would fight to the death. Moreover, Vera's existence had given these confused soldiers endless fighting spirit and firm belief. They believed that even if they died here, their stories would still be passed down in the northern frontier. Everyone would know that they had sworn to protect Vera St. Hilda. Even if the worst situation happened, they would still be lucky enough to return to the arms of the god of light together with their goddess. Kill! Colin took the lead and stood at the forefront of the battlefield. At this time, he must not back down. What greeted him was hundreds of sharp spears, like a suffocating forest of death. Boom! Colin collided with the leader of the troll cavalry without any fancy moves. After that, he felt as if he had collided with a tank. Colin only felt that his vision turned black, and the great pain almost made him lose his mind. He could even clearly hear the cracking sound of his bones breaking and the sound of the spears tearing his chest. He did not know how far he had been sent flying, and when he landed on the ground, he spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, he was depressed. He wanted to pretend to be a hero, but he did not expect, as soon as he came up, he encountered a high-level troll warrior. Wasn't this death a little too fast? Chapter 24. Young Master Colin. On the chaotic battlefield, only 2 people noticed that poor Colin had been sent flying by the impact. One of them was Raymond, and the other was Vera. Raymond was guarding Colin's side, but he did not expect that Colin would be sent flying. It was too late for him to rescue him. Since he was in the front row of the battlefield, Raymond did not have time to check on Colin's condition. He could only grit his teeth and fight against the trolls. As for Vera, she had not been paying attention to Colin the entire time. From the moment the troll wolf riders appeared, she had been hiding in the back row to prepare her spells. She had no time to care about the situation in the front row, until she was startled by Colin, who had descended from the sky and landed at her feet. Fortunately, she had just finished casting a spell and was resting. Otherwise, she would have been shocked by Colin's appearance. "Colin, are you okay?" Vera looked at Colin in front of her, and she was at a loss. This was because Colin's injury looked really scary. A spear had pierced through his chest and nailed him to the ground. With such an injury, even if Vera wanted to save him, she did not know where to start. At this time, Colin was in so much pain that he was gritting his teeth. The waves of pain made him lose consciousness. He wanted to simply pass out, but when he saw Vera next to him, he suddenly changed his mind. Now was not the time to play dead. If he did not take this opportunity to show off and leave a deep impression in Vera's heart, it would be a waste. After all, this young and beautiful female mage was the 4th successor of the Dukes of the North. She was a proper big thigh. If Colin wanted to deal with Earl Amon, who was secretly plotting to seize the Angeli family's title, this was an opportunity that he must seize. "Miss Vera, help me." How can I help?" "Pull it out." "No. You will die. Even if I die. I also want to die standing, instead of being nailed to the ground like a bug." Colin's performance fully demonstrated the basic qualities of an iron-blooded tough man. Vera was so shocked that she was speechless. "Hurry up." Vera grabbed the spear in front of Colin's chest with her trembling hands. Then she hesitantly looked into Colin's eyes. There, she saw no trace of cowardice or fear of death, only determination. Vera took a deep breath before she clenched her teeth and pulled on the rope with all her might. "Ah!" Colin screamed. He hated himself for not being immune to pain. "Colin!" Vera shouted as her eyes turned red. At the same time, she quickly stepped forward to support Colin, who was barely standing up. It was a familiar soft touch and a familiar fragrance. However, Colin did not have the time to be intoxicated. The intense pain made it impossible for him to remain calm, let alone stand alone. At this time, he realized that it was not easy to be a hero. "Forget it, I will just lie down and pretend to be dead, don't worry about me," Colin shouted. "Hurry up and prepare the spells. The soldiers who are fighting in front of the formation need your help more than I do." But Vera did not hesitate. She first helped Colin to sit on the ground before she turned around and began to cast the spells. At this time, the 2 sides were engaged in a fierce battle. However, Colin discovered that the troll cavalry was not able to penetrate the humans' formation. Instead, they were trapped in the formation and were tightly entangled by the soldiers who were not afraid of death. This time, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. As long as the troll cavalry was trapped in the formation and lost their speed advantage, then the humans would have a chance to win this battle. Moreover, the crisp sound of the horses' hooves could be heard again. It was Knight Bliss who had led the cavalry team back. This cavalry team of less than 100 people appeared at the most critical moment. They were like a sharp arrow that pierced straight into the troll army's back. "The reinforcements are here. Kill them." No one knew who shouted, but the human side suddenly erupted with an amazing momentum. On the other hand, The troll army fell into chaos because they were surrounded by enemies. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Colin only felt a sudden burst of cold air behind him. Then he saw countless raindrops falling from the sky, instantly freezing into ice blades and smashing into the center of the troll army's formation. Vera also began to show her power. Kill that sorcerer. The troll army also realized the existence of Vera and wanted to eliminate this long-range spellcaster. However, how could the human soldiers who were fighting for the goddess let the troll army succeed? They crazily surrounded Vera and formed a human wall in front of her to block the troll army's path. Blood and bones were splattered everywhere. The battle had reached its most tragic moment. Suddenly, Colin only saw a flash of red light and a blood-red spear broke through the human wall and suddenly appeared in front of Vera. This was a good opportunity. Without the slightest hesitation, Colin leaped in front of Vera, blocking her. Chi! The spear pierced Colin's chest again. It was as if he could feel that his heart, which had stopped beating for a long time, had been shattered into pieces by the 2 consecutive spear strikes. Colin! Colin! Vera rushed forward and tears flowed down her face uncontrollably. But Colin wanted to be emotional like some melodramatic television dramas, but the intense pain was about to overwhelm his will. At this time, he knew that he had to use the simplest action to leave the deepest impression in Vera's heart. Therefore, he said softly, I hope that I can bring one of your personal belongings with me when I am buried. No, you will not die. You will not die. Vera cried and shook her head. Colin stopped talking and slowly reached out his hand to touch Vera's earlobe. Vera did not stop him. She allowed Colin to take off one of her diamond earrings. Colin held the earring tightly in his palm and slowly closed his eyes. This is too painful. Colin screamed in his heart. However, he felt that his performance just now was not bad. He believed that he would be able to leave an indelible impression in Vera's heart. Moreover, through this rather ambiguous action, he also vaguely expressed his feelings of adoration. He believed that this would have a great impact on Vera, who was ignorant and inexperienced. Poor Vera did not know that the guy in her arms was pretending to be dead and was even using this opportunity to plot against her. However, after crying for a while, she immediately wiped her tears away. Now was not the time to be sad. Vera gently put Colin down and then turned around resolutely. She raised the staff in her hand high and started chanting. A powerful arcane energy began to gather around her. The rain seemed to be getting heavier. The winds seemed to be getting stronger as well. Vera's blonde hair turned pure white again. Even her blue eyes became pale white like ice that had not melted for thousands of years. An invisible force slowly lifted her up. The female mage stood proudly in midair and looked down at the battlefield in front of her like a god. At this moment, the extreme cold had arrived. Colin, who was on the verge of fainting, was also shivering from the cold at this time. He quietly opened one of his eyes to see what was going on. Due to the angle, he could only see Vera's robe fluttering in the air, as well as the exposed part of her, pink. 2 lines of blood spurted out from his nose. Night Colin's injury was even more serious. Chapter 25. As night fell, a bonfire lit up at the bend of the Rapids River. After a fierce battle, the humans finally won the final victory. It was a Pyrrhic victory. More than half of the original team of more than 1,000 people were killed or injured, and those who survived were all injured. However, after this battle, the momentum of this group of soldiers had changed qualitatively. It was as if they had turned into a regular army after the baptism of blood and fire. The camp was filled with a strong smell of blood, and various mutilated corpses had not been cleaned up yet. However, the survivors did not care. They enjoyed the rare hot food while bragging about their heroic performance during the day. Sar did not participate in the lively conversation of his companions. Instead, he picked up a skewer of grilled blackfish and walked towards the tent in the center of the camp. His left foot seemed to be injured, and he was limping and walking with difficulty. However, such a small injury was not a problem at all in this camp. There was a knight whose upper body was covered with bandages outside the tent. Sar knew that this was the knight of the Angeli family. His name was Raymond. The knight was leaning on his sword with his head lowered and his eyes closed. He seemed to be repenting and praying at the same time. Sar walked past him, but he did not respond at all. It was as if he was a statue. "Miss Vera, do you want to eat something?" "No, it's okay." Vera did not look back, but she refused softly. Sar quietly raised his head, but he could only see Vera's beautiful back and long white hair. "You have to pay attention to your body. You should eat something." Sar was still trying to persuade her, but Vera still did not respond. She was just staring blankly at the man in front of her who seemed to have fallen asleep. That man was naturally Colin. However, Colin was not pretending to be dead to gain sympathy at this time. He had really fallen asleep. After all, the injury that he had suffered before was too serious, and he had lost too much blood. Of course, perhaps he was also stimulated by the last scene that was not suitable for children. In short, Colin had completely fallen asleep. If he was not still breathing, perhaps everyone would have thought that he was already dead. No one thought that Colin would be able to survive such a terrifying injury. In fact, in the eyes of everyone, it was already a miracle that he could endure until now. Vera was the only one who did not want to give up. She continued to bandage Colin's wounds and continued to take care of him. When Vera noticed that Colin's lips were a little dry and cracked, she quickly dipped a handkerchief in some water before she gently wiped Colin's lips with it. When Sar saw this scene, he was filled with jealousy. He even wished that he was the one who was lying on the bed and being taken care of by Vera right now. "Miss Vera, let me take care of Knight Colin. You can go and rest now." "No need." Vera rejected Sar's offer once again before she waved her hand to signal the mercenaries to leave. Sar could only bury his disappointment deep in his heart and leave the tent. Meow. Little White suddenly appeared out of nowhere and moved closer to Colin before he gently licked his cheek. It seemed as though he was trying to wake up his human slave. Vera put down her handkerchief and stared at Colin's pale face for a long time. After that, she crossed her hands and clasped them in front of her chest as though she was praying. "Almighty God of light, please have mercy on this brave and fearless knight." This was the first time in Vera's life that she had ever prayed. Perhaps, this was also the first time that she had ever prayed to the God of light. "If I am lucky enough to witness your grace and mercy, then I will serve you for the rest of my life." This female mage who had always pursued the truth of the arcane arts was now willing to offer her faith to God for a man. He wondered if the God of light had heard the mage's prayer. Would he be willing to accept such a heretic? There was no beam of light that fell from the sky. There were no angels that suddenly appeared. Colin did not wake up miraculously. It was as though nothing had happened. Knight Bliss, who had just walked out of the tent, suddenly stopped. He seemed to have realized that he might have heard something that he should not have. After a long time, when there was no more sound coming out of the tent, Bliss stepped back into the tent. This knight was also a seriously injured person. His entire right arm had been cut off, and his body was covered with bandages that were still bleeding. However, he still had a calm and indifferent expression on his face, as if he did not care about his injuries at all. "Miss, the preliminary casualty statistics have been completed. In this battle, we have lost 428 soldiers and more than 350 people are seriously injured. The rest of the soldiers have only minor injuries." Vera did not have any concept of such casualty statistics, so she just listened quietly. However, for a veteran like Knight Bliss, this battle was definitely a miracle. One had to know that such a ratio of casualties was enough to cause the entire army to collapse, even if it was the most elite regular army. However, the soldiers of the River Bend barracks fought tenaciously to the end and even won the battle. Perhaps Vera had contributed a lot to this. After all, her identity had enough appeal. However, Bliss was very clear that this was mostly due to Colin's strategy of fighting to the death. Thinking of this, he looked at Colin on the bed with a look of admiration and regret, and continued to ask, "Miss, what should we do next?" When she heard this question, Vera was a little confused. "What do you think?" "There were 2 wolf cavalry units that chased us to the Rapids River. Although we have just defeated one of them, we are not completely out of danger yet. This is because the other wolf cavalry unit has been confused by our arrangement and has already crossed the river to the north. However, I believe that they will soon discover that something is wrong and turn back. However, the victory that we have just achieved will definitely make the other party hesitate. They will not be able to figure out our specific strength and will not dare to chase after us easily. Therefore, my opinion is to continue to stay at the river bend and send a messenger to the nearby cities to ask for reinforcements. As long as our reinforcements arrive before the trolls gather more soldiers, we will be safe. Vera was a little speechless. She could hear the uncertainty in Night Bliss's words, but she could not come up with a better idea. At this time, she naturally turned her eyes to Colin, who was still sleeping. If he could wake up, there must be a better way. Okay, we will do as you say. After leaving the tent, Bliss walked with his head down. He was considering which directions he should send the messengers to, and how he could avoid being intercepted by the trolls on the way. Da-da-da, the sound of horse hooves interrupted Bliss's thoughts. He raised his head and saw 2 cavalrymen running towards the camp. He quickly recognized that one of the cavalrymen was the one that he had sent to guard the perimeter. However, he did not know the other person. However, he recognized the armor that the other person was wearing. This kind of pure black armor was only worn by one army in the entire Empire of Light. The Black Cavalry. Bliss was ecstatic. He couldn't help but look back at Vera's tent as a thought flashed through his mind. Did the God of Light really answer Mrs. Prayer? Chapter 26. Have you heard? The Black Cavalry is nearby. They will send someone to pick us up soon. The Black Cavalry? Is that true? Of course it's true. Last night, I saw a scout from the Black Cavalry enter our camp. Miss Vera even personally received him. So we are safe? Nonsense. With the Black Cavalry nearby, how would the trolls have the guts to come? Similar conversations were going on in every corner of the camp. The tense atmosphere in the air was completely swept away, and it was replaced by the excitement of surviving a calamity. It was as if the named Black Cavalry had some kind of special magic power. As long as they were nearby, it meant that they were absolutely safe. The reason was very simple. The Black Cavalry was the most powerful army in the northern frontier of the Empire. Yes, they were the most powerful. The number of people in this army was actually not that big. There were only 50,000 of them. However, this was an army made up of pure cavalry. This army of 50,000 cavalry was worthy of being the guardian of the northern frontier. It was also a nightmare that the trolls could not get rid of. Dong dong dong. As noon approached, the earth suddenly began to tremble. A black torrent appeared on the horizon and quickly rushed towards the river bend camp. However, the people in the camp did not panic at all. This was because they had already seen the flag of a black lion fluttering in the wind. The emblem of the House of St. Hilda, the master of the northern frontier, was a golden lion. Therefore, no other family in the northern frontier dared to use a lion as their emblem. The person who came was naturally from the House of St. Hilda. However, the average person from the House of St. Hilda would not dare to change the golden lion's emblem to black. There was only one exception. He was the younger brother of the current Dukes of the North and the highest commander of the Black Cavalry, Garcia St. Hilda. Unlike the eldest son of the Duke, Marquis Charles, who had a fake title, Marquis Garcia was a feudal lord. He was also the only Marquis on the northern frontier. His territory occupied almost a quarter of the entire northern frontier. It was this vast land that allowed Marquis Garcia to support the Black Cavalry, an army of pure cavalry. As the army approached, Vera also came out to greet them personally. Behind her, there were excited and even fanatical soldiers. In the northern frontier, almost all aspiring youths viewed joining the Black Cavalry as the highest honor. However, the Black Cavalry's recruitment standards were extremely strict. It was so strict that it made people wonder if the Black Cavalry didn't want any more recruits. Huff huff huff. Amidst the neighing of the horses, the Black Cavalry started to slow down. The leading knight in a black cloak lifted the visor of his helmet, revealing a dignified face. Uncle Garcia. Vera could not help but shout out loud as tears flashed in her eyes. The hardships, fights, and parting of life and death that she had encountered along the way had drained the 18-year-old noble girl both mentally and physically. Now that she had finally seen her pillar of support, she could not help but lose her composure. Marquis Garcia dismounted from his horse and walked in front of Vera with a gentle smile on his face. "Welcome home." Vera did not care about maintaining the aristocratic etiquette anymore. She quickly took a few steps forward and threw herself into the arms of Marquis Garcia. "Ha!" Marquis Garcia suddenly laughed out loud as he stretched out his hand and patted Vera's back gently. "It seems that you were really frightened by the trolls. Don't be afraid, Uncle will avenge you." "Uncle?" Vera suddenly felt a little embarrassed. "Don't worry. Those trolls who invaded the northern frontier will not be able to return alive." Marquis Garcia looked at Vera's white hair and his eyes flashed with a cold light. "That's what I said." When such arrogant words came out of Marquis Garcia's mouth, it sounded particularly natural. No one present dared to doubt whether Marquis Garcia had the ability to fulfill his promise or not. This Marquis who commanded the Black Cavalry was like a god on the battlefield. "Greetings, Marquis Garcia." Knight Bliss also hurriedly stepped forward and saluted. "Knight Bliss." Marquis Garcia noticed that the other party's right arm was missing. "It is a pity that you have lost an arm. My opponent is even more regretful because he has lost his head." "Ha! Good. This is what a knight of the northern frontier should be like." Marquis Garcia thumped Bliss's chest a few times and did not hide his appreciation for him at all. Knight Bliss, who had always been calm and even indifferent at this time, showed a rare look of respect and even fanaticism in front of the god of war of the northern frontier. Not to mention the soldiers behind him, most of them were seeing the legendary Marquis of the northern frontier for the first time. All of them were so excited that their faces turned red, as if they were waiting for Marquis Garcia's order to kill the trolls. Even Sar, who had always been a filial son, was almost unable to control himself when he looked at Marquis Garcia's tall figure at this time. "I want to be like him too," Sar secretly vowed in his heart. After Marquis Garcia appeased the fanatical soldiers, Vera finally had time to step forward and ask, "Uncle, there are still many wounded people in the camp. Please immediately arrange for doctors and priests to treat them. In addition, there is also a knight who is seriously injured. Don't worry, after I received the news, I specially brought the doctors and priests who were accompanying the army." Marquis Garcia pointed to an old priest with gray hair behind him and introduced him to Vera. "I even brought Archbishop Raven with me. It is my honor to be able to serve you." Archbishop Raven bowed to Vera. "Then I will have to trouble you." Vera was relieved. Although she did not know Archbishop Raven, she knew that the position of an archbishop was not something that an ordinary priest could hold. In the entire northern frontier, the Church of Glory had only arranged 3 archbishops. The profession of a priest was not a fighting profession, and their combat power was not strong. Their main job, in addition to serving the God of glory and spreading the glory of the Lord, was to preside over baptisms and treat the sick and the wounded. It was a standard auxiliary profession. Therefore, unlike other combat professions such as warriors, knights, and mages, this profession could not be divided by strength. However, generally speaking, the higher a priest's position in the church, the stronger his healing ability would be. In Vera's opinion, this Archbishop Raven should be the God of Glory's response to her prayers. Therefore, she did not dare to hesitate and quickly led Archbishop Raven and others to the tent where Colin was. Marquis Garcia also followed. He was very curious about the background of the knight who could make his niece so nervous. When they arrived outside the tent, Vera and Raven went straight in. However, Marquis Garcia stopped in his tracks. "What is your name?" He had already noticed the man who had been standing outside the tent. Previously, when everyone had gathered around to welcome him, this man was the only one who had stayed behind and refused to budge an inch. "Dear Marquis, my name is Raymond Mauben, and I am a knight of the Angeli family." "Then the one inside is..." "The one inside is the son of the Baron, Knight Colin Angeli." Marquis Garcia nodded and patted Raymond's shoulder twice to comfort him, and then walked into the tent. "How is Knight Colin's injury?" "Not very good." Archbishop Raven frowned and said, "In fact, It is a miracle that he is still alive with such an injury. Please do your best. Vera pleaded from the side. Raven glanced at Vera, and then looked back at Marquis Garcia. He then took out a delicate small bottle. Then, I can only try the holy water. Chapter 27. Colin had a dream. It was a very long dream. In the dream, he was entangled by a huge silver python. Moreover, it was getting tighter and tighter. The terrifying pressure crushed his bones and internal organs, and even his blood was being squeezed out. He felt like an orange that had been thrown into a juicer. He was afraid that becoming a dried corpse was his unavoidable fate. Of course, Colin was unwilling to give in. But his limbs were tightly entangled and he could not move at all. So he could only bite the python's body and suck crazily. If you squeeze me, then I'll suck you too. This was Colin's plan. However, he found a serious problem. He couldn't suck anything. The python's body seemed to be empty and there was nothing in it. As time passed, Colin's consciousness gradually blurred. The python's body gradually tightened, and Colin was getting closer and closer to the dried corpse. He didn't know how much time had passed. Just when Colin was about to give up resisting, he suddenly found that he could suck blood from the snake's body. It was as if a long drought suddenly fell on the earth. That mouthful was sweet. It was the taste of vitality. However, there was only one mouthful. Colin tried his best to drink milk, but he couldn't suck any more. Ah! Under extreme anger, Colin woke up. Great! Colin, you're finally awake. Colin opened his eyes, but he could only see a blurry shadow. He could vaguely recognize that it should be Vera's voice just now. Am I drinking? Colin opened his mouth, wanting to drink more. You're drinking holy water. Holy water. Colin was stunned. You're giving a vampire holy water to drink? Before he could breathe, Colin fainted again. Colin? Colin? Vera was a little anxious and looked at Archbishop Raven for help. The Archbishop calmly opened Colin's mouth and poured a few drops of holy water into it. Then, there was no reaction. The Archbishop refused to believe it and poured a few more drops into his mouth. There was still no reaction. The Archbishop gritted his teeth and gulped down the entire bottle. He then looked at the empty bottle with a pained expression. After all, the water he gave Colin was pure holy water. Normally, the holy water used by the church for treatment was diluted 1,000 times with water. Although he only had a small bottle in his hand, after dilution, it was enough for a parish to use for a whole year. But even so, there was still no reaction. The Archbishop checked Colin's breathing, then pried open Colin's eyelids to take a look. After fiddling with it for a while, he said in an uncertain tone, his injuries seem to have stabilized. He should be fine after some rest. Vera heaved a sigh of relief and quickly thanked him. When Marquis Garcia and the others saw this, they left the tent and let Colin rest. Vera was the only one who stayed behind. When Marquis Garcia saw this, he did not say anything, but he frowned slightly. After leaving the tent, he asked Knight Bliss, "Tell me about Knight Colin." "Sir." Bliss followed behind Marquis Garcia and explained, "He is the son of Baron Angelo, the Lord of Grey Castle Town. He was on the way to Eagle City with a mercenary group when he was sent to Mirror Lake Camp by Marquis Charles." "Mercenary group?" Marquis Garcia was a little confused. He is the son of a baron. Why would he follow a mercenary group to Eagle City? It should be to hide his identity. I asked the son of the leader of the mercenary group, and he said that Knight Colin used the false identity of the son of the Sioux Duo Viscounts to sneak into the mercenary group. Bliss had indeed checked Colin's identity and origin, and the filial son Sar obviously would not help Colin hide anything, so he told him everything truthfully. Is the Angeli family close to the Sioux Duo family? As far as I know, the two families do not have much contact. However, recently, the territory of the Sioux Duo Viscounts has been occupied by the trolls, so Colin probably thought that pretending to be a knight of this family would not be easy to be seen through, and he would not be investigated. Marquis Garcia nodded and made his own judgment. Yes. Pretending to be an identity, and no one from the Angeli family following him. I am afraid that something has happened to the Angeli family. Bliss thought for a moment, and then he provided another piece of information. Sir, Baron Angelo unfortunately died in battle when he was following Marquis Charles. That's right. Marquis Garcia smiled indifferently. I guess it is a matter of the inheritance of the Baron. There is nothing else new. Obviously, the fight for the Baron's title would not attract Marquis Garcia's attention, so he mentioned it lightly, but did not ask any more questions. Instead, he let Bliss continue his story. Miss Vera also happened to be on the way back to the northern frontier when she received the conscription order, and she also came to the Mirror Lake camp. As Bliss spoke, he observed Marquis Garcia's reaction. Especially when he mentioned that Marquis Charles used all the urgently recruited soldiers as bait, Bliss looked at Marquis Garcia with a slightly nervous look. Marquis Garcia was expressionless. We fled all the way to the south, but we could not get rid of the wolf cavalry behind us. Knight Colin suggested that we turn around and go to the north, in the direction where the wolf cavalry least expected to break through. On the way to the north, we encountered the defeated soldiers who escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield. After gathering the defeated soldiers, we were gradually caught up with. Colin suggested that we hide in the bay of the Rapids River and arrange some soldiers. In the end, we had no choice but to fight back, and we won. After Bliss finished speaking, he stood quietly aside, waiting for Marquis Garcia's instructions. Marquis Garcia looked at the turbulent Rapids River in front of him, but he did not speak. After a long time, he asked, "What kind of person do you think Knight Colin is?" Bliss was stunned, but he quickly said bluntly, "Brave, loyal, intelligent, and a person who was born to be on the battlefield." Garcia smiled noncommittally. "It seems that you have a high opinion of him." Bliss nodded solemnly. If it was before the battle at the bay of the Rapids River, Bliss's impression of Colin was not very good. This was because although Colin showed a very high sense of the battlefield, after all, he had lied and wanted to abandon the defeated soldiers. However, after the battle at the bay of the Rapids River, Bliss's impression of Colin had completely changed. Whether it was giving up the last chance to escape and choosing to stay, or fighting in the front row of the battlefield, or risking his life to block a bullet for Vera, the glorious image that he had shown made the previous small flaws seem insignificant. Therefore, Bliss was willing to put in a few good words for Colin in front of Marquis Garcia. He could see that the Marquis also had some appreciation for Colin. "He is indeed a talented general." Marquis Garcia nodded, but he frowned slightly. "However, he is a little bit off track. Fortunately, he is still young." Looking at the puzzled Bliss, the Marquis did not explain too much. Instead, he changed the topic. "Well, let's not talk about him. This time, I am here to clean up Charles's mess. So, I need you to do something for me. Please tell me. I will give you a team of cavalry. Go to Coldwinter City immediately to meet my brother and ask him for a military order for me." "What military order?" "Send troops to support them. The trolls are already at home. How can I sit back and do nothing?" "Send troops?" Bliss was a little puzzled, but he immediately reacted and his face turned pale in an instant. Didn't you receive the Duke's order to send troops to support them?" Marquis Garcia looked at Bliss with interest. "I sent troops without permission?" Bliss only felt a chill run down his spine, and a terrible thought emerged in his mind uncontrollably. However, he still lowered his head and said in a deep voice, "Yes, Margaret, I will set off now." Chapter 28. Colin woke up. He looked around and found that he was still in the original tent. He did not know how many days he had been in a coma. He could only judge from the surrounding light that it was night time. In addition to him, there was one other person in the tent, Vera. She was lying quietly on the edge of the bed, seemingly asleep. Colin looked at Vera's white hair, and there was a trace of warmth in his heart. It was undeniable that his previous actions were indeed a show by relying on his undying body. But it seemed that he had gone a little too far. Now that he thought about it, when he was injured for the first time, he was still able to control the injury. But the second time, when he blocked the bullet for Vera, he could not control it anymore. the severe pain and the severe wound made Colin unable to stop the bleeding in time. In addition, he also saw some scenes that were not suitable for children. In short, Colin felt that this accident should be caused by excessive blood loss. It seemed that he must stop the bleeding immediately if he was injured in the future. Colin secretly warned himself. Then, he remembered that he seemed to have woken up once before. Moreover, at that time, there was a priest pouring holy water into his mouth. However, the holy water did not seem to cause any harm to him. Instead, it helped him recover from his injuries. It was not just recovering from his injuries. Colin carefully felt the changes in his body. He found that his body was slightly hot, just like the situation when he drank Night Carter's blood. Could it be that the holy water could also help him improve his strength? This was interesting. Colin suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and decided to wait a few more days to see if his strength really improved. If the holy water really had the same effect as the knight's blood, then the vampire settings in this world were a bit strange. Or, there was something wrong with the holy water of the Church of Brilliance. Also, there was the silver python that he had dreamed of in his coma. It seemed that it was not just an inexplicable dream. He always felt that the taste of the blood of the giant python was a bit too real. It was so real that it did not feel like a dream. Colin lay on the bed, his thoughts running wild. He had just woken up from a coma and could not sleep. So, he waited until dawn with his eyes open. "Good morning, Miss Vera." "Ah, Colin, you're awake." When Colin saw the genuine surprise in Vera's eyes, he felt a little guilty in his heart. Was it really a good idea to deceive such a naive little girl? But soon, Colin shook off this thought. After all, although he had planned to play dead, he had almost succeeded. Therefore, Vera's good impression of him could be said to have been exchanged with his life. According to the plot of a melodramatic TV drama, Vera should have already given herself to him by now. How long have I been unconscious? 3 whole days? So long. That's right. It's all thanks to Archbishop Riven's holy water. Colin secretly remembered Raven's name, and at the same time inquired, "Then I must thank him. I wonder why Archbishop Riven is here?" "He came here with my uncle, Marquis Garcia. By the way, my uncle brought the Black Cavalry to support us, so we are safe. Marquis Garcia is here too. Then we are indeed safe. You must be hungry, right? I'll go and find you something to eat," Vera said as she got up and walked out of the tent. Looking at the girl's graceful figure, Colin suddenly felt that this injury was not a loss. Meow, Little White also found that his human slave had woken up. He excitedly came over and licked Colin a few times, and then found a comfortable position on the bed and continued to sleep. Colin touched the kitten's soft fur and began to search for information about Marquis Garcia in his mind. Then, he found that his predecessor was actually an admirer of Marquis Garcia. Well, who was not a young man of his age in the northern frontier. However, Colin also found some interesting things from his memory. For example, although Marquis Garcia was the first person in the Northern Frontier Army, and the Black Cavalry in his hands was also an invincible army. However, he had already retired from the front line against the trolls 3 years ago. Although it was Marquis Garcia who took the initiative to retire from the front line, and he also advertised that he wanted to take a vacation and let the Black Cavalry soldiers take a break. However, in the eyes of discerning people, this official story was obviously not the truth of the matter. There was only one reason why Marquis Garcia retired from the front line: suspicion. Suspicion from the Dukes of the North. Although there was no such thing as a high merit overshadowing the master in this world, the truth was the same. There was no difference in people's hearts. The prestige of Marquis Garcia and the strength of the Black Cavalry had made the Dukes of the North restless. Even if Marquis Garcia was the younger brother of the Dukes of the North. However, in the face of power, not to mention brothers, even father and son were unreliable. A terrifying force like the Black Cavalry could make the trolls not dare to set foot in the northern frontier. They could also sweep across the northern frontier and change the owner of chilly Winter City. Therefore, Marquis Garcia was transferred away from the front line. The sharp blade of the Black Cavalry was also forced to be sheathed. The one who replaced him at the front line was the eldest son of the Dukes of the North, Marquis Charles. The Dukes of the North obviously hoped that their son could take over this heavy responsibility and hone a powerful army for the northern frontier. An army that truly belonged to the House of St. Hilda. This was to balance the influence of Marquis Garcia. Unfortunately, Marquis Charles was a little disappointing. He had held on for 3 years at the front line, but in the end he could not hold on. The trolls had attacked. Therefore, Marquis Garcia had to be used again. However, Colin was a little worried. If Marquis Garcia lived up to expectations this time and once again defeated the trolls like he had repeated countless times, then, how would the Duke of St. Hilda reward his meritorious subject? It was impossible to promote his title. Above the Marquis was the Duke, and the northern frontier could only have one Duke. As for the territory, the size of Marquis Garcia's territory had far exceeded the standard of an ordinary marquis. Moreover, more territory meant more taxes and more people, which also meant greater military potential. Although the Black Cavalry was powerful, it also cost a lot to support them. Therefore, their scale had never exceeded 50,000 people. But if they were given more nutrients and allowed to continue to expand, that would be even more difficult to deal with. Thinking of this, Colin suddenly felt a little sympathy for Vera's adoptive father. Asking the Black Cavalry to come to the rescue showed that the situation at the front line was really critical, but it was inevitable that it was like drinking poison to quench one's thirst. Of course, if Colin knew that Marquis Garcia sent troops without the Duke's order this time, he would be even more worried. Chapter 29. On the 7th day after Colin woke up, the Black Cavalry finally set out again. However, the speed of the army was very slow. It was so slow that it did not seem like an elite cavalry at all. This speed was very suitable for Colin. After all, he had not fully recovered from his injuries. He didn't know where Raymond had gotten his hands on a flatbed trailer, but he had covered it with some straw to cushion it. Colin felt quite comfortable lying on it. The spring sun was warm and gentle, making people sleepy. Even though Colin, as a vampire, didn't like the sun, he slowly began to doze off under the sun. Although he was in the most elite army on the northern frontier, Colin still felt like he was on a vacation. Vera was not nearby. After all, she was the adopted daughter of the Dukes of the North. Even if she had a good impression of Colin, she would not stay by his side all the time. Otherwise, wouldn't he be a bootlicker? Even if he wanted to bootlick, Colin should be the one taking the initiative. After all, Vera's identity was much nobler than Colin's. However, looking at Colin's expression, it was obvious that he did not intend to strike while the iron was hot. Flirting with a girl was a must. This was the painful lesson that Colin had learned from his failed bootlicker career in his previous life. Just like that, the army leisurely marched north. As they gradually approached the Mirror Lake camp, they encountered more and more defeated soldiers. Marquis Garcia did not refuse any of them. He gathered all of them and arranged them to be auxiliary soldiers at the rear of the army. From these defeated soldiers, Colin slowly learned more about the details of Marquis Charles's defeat. This war had actually started last year. At the beginning of May last year, under the leadership of the troll prince Gambic Vulcan, an army of 300,000 trolls gathered at the border and were ready to move south. On the northern frontier, Marquis Charles led an army of 200,000 to fight against the trolls. Out of the 200,000 soldiers, 100,000 of them came from the House of St. Hilda's personal army, the Golden Lion Legion. The other 100,000 were the private armies of the various lords of the northern frontier. For example, Colin's father, Baron Angeli, personally led 3,000 soldiers to the front line after receiving the order from the Duke of St. Hilda. Although they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, the humans were not at a disadvantage in terms of momentum. After all, in recent decades, the northern frontier had never lost a battle against the trolls. In particular, the commander of the troll army, Prince Gambic, was an old acquaintance of Marquis Garcia who had beaten him to the ground in various postures. Under such circumstances, it was inevitable for the northern frontier to lower their guard. But most people didn't realize or were unwilling to admit that Marquis Garcia and his black cavalry were the guarantee of victory on the northern frontier. Now that this guarantee of victory had disappeared, could Marquis Charles alone bear the burden of guarding the border? Obviously, things did not develop according to the northern frontier's expectations. From the beginning of the confrontation, Marquis Charles seemed to be unable to do anything. In the small-scale probing battles, Marquis Charles was in dire straits and exhausted. At this time, the troll commander, Prince Gambique, had already figured out the true situation of the Duke's son and understood that Marquis Charles's ability to command the battlefield could not be compared to the previous Marquis. As a result, the trolls gradually strengthened their attacks, and in the winter of last year, they broke through the defensive line set up by the Northern Alliance and killed their way in. Marquis Charles retreated until he was near Mirror Lake. There, he issued an emergency conscription order and placed the recruited soldiers in the Mirror Lake camp as bait while he led the main army to ambush nearby. Then, when the troll attacked the Mirror Lake camp, Marquis Charles led the army to attack from behind. Unfortunately, he still failed. Other than the two fatal errors in Colin's analysis, there was another important reason for Marquis Charles's defeat. His plan was seen through by the troll in advance. It was not known if Prince Gambique really had great foresight, or if he had discovered the tracks of Marquis Charles's army, or if someone had leaked military secrets. In short, when the troll attacked the Mirror Lake camp, they did not attack with the whole army. Instead, they arranged the main forces at the back and waited for Marquis Charles to enter the trap. Thus, Marquis Charles was defeated again. The 200,000-strong army was almost wiped out in this series of defeats. Even Marquis Charles himself was being chased by the troll and his whereabouts were unknown. No. Marquis Charles's whereabouts were soon clear. On the 13th day after the Black Cavalry left the Rapids River, they met with a large-scale defeated army. This defeated army had about 5,000 people, and the one leading this defeated army was Marquis Charles. Behind them, there was a troll army of about 8,000 people chasing after them. However, when this army saw the flag of the Black Cavalry from afar, they decisively turned around and gave up the chase. They did not even have the courage to test the attack. Marquis Charles was finally saved. However, his tragic fate had just begun. After knowing that Marquis Charles was in this defeated army, Colin also left the trailer and prepared to watch the show. Colin definitely did not have a good impression of this Marquis Charles. First of all, the death of his cheap father was most likely caused by this fellow's mistakes in command. This also led to the death of his predecessor and the assassination of Knight Carter. Furthermore, after he escaped from Grey Castle Town, he was sent to the Mirror Lake camp by Marquis Charles's emergency conscription order to be bait. Then, there was this series of pursuit and near-death experience. Therefore, when Colin saw Marquis Charles's current sorry state, he gloated. "Uncle." At this moment, Marquis Charles was half kneeling in front of Marquis Garcia with a gloomy expression. Although the two of them were both marquises, their status was worlds apart. Furthermore, this series of defeats completely caused Marquis Charles to fall from his pedestal. Furthermore, it also highlighted the importance of Marquis Garcia. "You fought a good battle." Marquis Garcia did not let Charles get up. Instead, he scolded him with a cold face. "Uncle, I was careless." Under everyone's gaze, Marquis Garcia directly whipped Charles, who was trying to find an excuse, to the ground. The entire place was silent. Some timid people even lowered their heads and did not dare to look again. Although Marquis Garcia was Marquis Charles's elder, he was still the first successor of the Duke and the future lord of the northern frontier. He had actually been whipped in front of so many people. Bastard. A loss is a loss. Other than being useless, what other reason do you have? When Charles heard this, his entire body trembled. He immediately crawled at the feet of Marquis Garcia and shouted, "Uncle, I was wrong. I was wrong. I've let down the house of St. Hilda. I've let down the dead soldiers. I've let down the people of the northern frontier. Boo-hoo." A dignified marquis, the future lord of the northern frontier, actually in public, cried. Chapter 30. After nightfall, the temperature began to drop. The spring night in the northern frontier was also quite cold. In the camp, the soldiers lit the bonfire to warm themselves and boil water to cook. At the same time, they began to chat. The content was, of course, the meeting between the two marquises during the day, Marquis Garcia's whip and Marquis Charles's cry. Colin blended in among these soldiers in a low-key manner, listening to their idle chatter. Then he suddenly realized that the attitude of these soldiers towards Marquis Charles had an unexpected change. Before today, these soldiers, especially the defeated soldiers who escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield, had an extremely bad attitude towards Marquis Charles. Contempt, disgust, disdain. Of course, it was not surprising for a defeated general to have such a bad reputation. Moreover, this Marquis Charles had also issued an emergency conscription order and used the people who were recruited as cannon fodder. It could be said that if he was not the eldest son of the Duke, if it was not for the House of St. Hilda's reputation in the northern frontier, Marquis Charles would have been swallowed alive by these angry soldiers. However, Marquis Charles's cry during the day seemed to have gradually changed the direction of public opinion. Colin listened carefully to the discussion of the soldiers and gradually came back to his senses. He did not know whether Marquis Charles's cry was a display of his true feelings or a political show. However, it did have the demeanor of a big-eared Lou. That person was an expert in this aspect. The more he cried, the more he would win the hearts of the people. In addition, regarding Marquis Garcia's whip, Colin felt that there was a deep meaning behind it. At that time, Colin's first impression of this was only one word: domineering. This whip was not only aimed at Marquis Charles, but also at the Duke of St. Hilda's face. Colin originally thought that this was Marquis Garcia venting his dissatisfaction with the Duke. After all, this fiasco was ultimately because the Duke had hidden the Black Cavalry back then. But now that he thought about it, it also meant to help Marquis Charles get rid of the blame. I have already whipped him in public, so you should not resent him anymore. That was the gist of it. From the looks of it, Marquis Garcia was actually taking care of Marquis Charles, while Colin was lost in his thoughts. A soldier suddenly came up behind him. "Knight Colin, Marquis Charles invites you in." Colin was shocked. He hadn't expected the Marquis to come looking for him. "All right, please lead the way." Colin wondered why Marquis Charles was looking for him as he followed the soldiers all the way to a luxurious tent in the middle of the camp. "Greetings, Marquis." As the first successor of the Angeli family, Marquis Charles was qualified to receive Colin's kowtow. "Knight Colin, please rise." Marquis Charles quickly stepped forward and pulled Colin up affectionately. This Marquis looked to be in his 30s. His face was weathered, and his naked upper body was wrapped in bandages. It was unknown whether he had really suffered so many injuries or if he was just putting on a show. However, Colin didn't care about this. He wasn't like those soldiers who would be forgiven and sympathized with just a few cries from the higher-ups. "May I know what orders the Marquis has for me?" Colin discreetly shook off Marquis Charles's overly affectionate hands and bowed as he asked. Marquis Charles didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned around and took a two-handed sword from a guard, solemnly handing it over to Colin. "I'm sorry, Knight Colin. Your father, Baron Angeli, unfortunately died in the front lines. It's all my fault. This is his sword, please. My condolences." Marquis Charles started sobbing again as he spoke. Colin couldn't help but admire his acting skills. His tears came at the drop of a hat, much better than some of the dead-faced young hunks. "Marquis Charles, don't be like this. My father sacrificed his life for the country. It's his honor, not your fault." Colin also tried his best to squeeze out a few tears, his face impassioned. "I swear that I will kill all the invading trolls and avenge my father. Please give me this opportunity, Marquis Charles." Marquis Charles's eyes lit up, obviously not expecting Colin to be so tactful and cooperative. He held Colin's hands and said loudly, "Don't worry, Knight Colin. I promise you that I will kill all these damn trolls and avenge Baron Angeli and the other soldiers of the northern frontier who sacrificed their lives." Colin suppressed the disgust in his heart and said, "Thank you, Marquis Charles. This is what I should do, Knight Colin." The two of them held hands and looked at each other with tears in their eyes. The atmosphere gradually became a little more intimate. After a long time, the two film kings finally calmed down from the atmosphere just now. Marquis Charles collected his emotions and pulled Colin to sit down together with him. "Night, Colin. I heard from Vera about your experience of escaping, so on behalf of my father and the House of St. Hilda, I want to thank you for protecting Vera from the trolls." "This is what I should do." Marquis Charles nodded, and then his tone suddenly became a little ambiguous. "Night, Colin. From my sister's story, I can clearly feel that she values you. Moreover, I heard that she personally begged Archbishop Raven to treat you with pure holy water. I have never seen my sister value another man so much in all these years. Miss Vera's kindness, I will never be able to repay it." Colin understood that Marquis Charles probably saw his military talent from Vera's narration, and that was why he wanted to buy people's hearts now. However, if Marquis Charles had extended an olive branch to him before this battle, Colin would not hesitate to be loyal to him. But now, Colin would not easily get on this broken boat that was in danger of capsizing. "However, Knight Colin, even if you inherit the title of Baron of the Angeli family, I am afraid that if you want to marry my sister, you will not be able to." Marquis Charles continued speaking, as if he was speaking from the bottom of his heart. "Marquis Charles, how would I dare to have such thoughts? Miss Vera is a goddess-like figure. How would I dare to blaspheme her?" Colin would not admit that he had such thoughts. Knight Colin, you don't have to belittle yourself like this." Marquis Charles smiled and waved his hand. "With your talent, you will definitely be able to make contributions on the battlefield, and it will not be difficult for you to be promoted." "Marquis Charles, you are overpraising me. Fighting for the northern frontier is my lifelong wish, and I dare not ask for more." Colin felt a little despised in his heart. This Marquis Charles actually used his sister as a bargaining chip to buy people's hearts. What's more, Colin did not believe that Marquis Charles had much say in Vera's marriage. Of course, Marquis Charles may not really want to help Colin marry his sister. The promise of such a political figure was as unreliable as the boss's "do well, and I will definitely give you a promotion and a raise in the future." Therefore, Colin was flattered on the surface and even showed some attachment, but he was secretly vigilant in his heart. Marquis Charles did not seem to see Colin's perfunctory attitude, and he still treated him warmly. The two talked for a long time, and it was as if they regretted not having met earlier. It was not until late at night that Colin got up and said goodbye. Marquis Charles personally sent him out of the tent. Just as Colin was about to bow and say goodbye, Marquis Charles suddenly looked behind Colin and said in surprise, "Sister, it is so late, and you are not asleep yet." Chapter 31. Colin turned around and saw Vera standing not far away from him. Under the cold moonlight, Colin was surprised to find that the Duke's adopted daughter was not wearing the loose mage robe. Instead, she had changed into a pure white noble dress. Her long blonde hair was still wet, and it seemed that she had just finished bathing. Her sea-blue eyes sparkled with a mesmerizing halo, revealing a trace of surprise after seeing Colin. "I couldn't sleep, so I came out to take a walk. Didn't you sleep too?" I just exchanged my experience with Knight Colin about fighting against the trolls." Marquis Charles patted Colin's shoulder and gave him an ambiguous look. "I will go to sleep first. You two can talk." After saying this, Marquis Charles decisively went back to his tent, leaving Colin and Vera alone. Colin suddenly realized that he had not seen Vera for a long time after his injury got better. Looking at the delicate face of the other party, Colin suddenly smiled and made a bold evaluation. "Your dress is much better than the mage robe." Indeed, the mage robe was too loose and it could not highlight Vera's beautiful figure. When she heard Colin's rather explicit and slightly rude evaluation, Vera's face faintly flushed. She glared at Colin fiercely but did not reprimand him. Of course, Colin would not be scared off by a glare. A woman's non-forceful resistance was actually a form of encouragement. Therefore, Colin greeted her and stood side by side with Vera. The night was quiet, and only the faint sound of insects could be heard. Vera raised her head and stared at the bright moon, as if she didn't realize that there was a man beside her. Colin did not break the rare silence, and he also looked up at the moon. There was a faint fragrance in the air. It seemed to be roses. What was the flower language of roses? Colin began to let his imagination run wild again. "You know my brother?" Vera suddenly said. She felt that the atmosphere at the moment was too ambiguous and she was not used to it. "No, this is our first time meeting. But you two seem to be very familiar with each other." "That's because we get along well." "Is that so?" Colin stopped talking and continued to look at the moon in the sky, as if it was something more attractive than the beauty beside him. The two of them fell silent again. Vera was waiting for Colin to speak, but Colin was waiting for Vera to speak instead. He purposely created silence to make the women feel awkward so that they could not help but take the initiative to break the silence. This was a simple and practical trick to pick up girls. Don't be afraid that women will be angry. As long as it was used properly, they wouldn't. On the contrary, she would find such a cold man even more attractive. On the other hand, those men who always took the initiative to find topics to talk about were noisy. Women usually called these men lapdog. "What are you holding in your hand?" Sure enough, Vera opened her mouth again. Colin was happy, but he put on a sad expression on his face and said in a deep voice, "This is my father's legacy." I'm sorry." Vera's heart ached and she quickly apologized. "My condolences." Colin heaved a sigh of relief and it seemed like he wanted to squeeze out a few more tears. However, he did not succeed. No matter how good an actor was, he still needed a good partner. At this time, Colin suddenly missed Marquis Charles. "I'm fine. It was my father's lifelong wish to die on the battlefield. It is also the best ending for the knights on the northern frontier." Baron Angeli was a great knight. Vera bowed slightly and paid her respects to the sword in Colin's hand. "May the god of light bless his soul." Colin was stunned. He almost suspected that he was hallucinating. The female mage in front of him was actually praying to the god of light. Was this still the same heretic who only believed in the truth and not the gods? Vera raised her head and saw Colin's shocked face. She immediately realized why the other party was surprised. She explained softly, "My lord, yes, I have decided to serve the god of light." "Really?" Vera nodded her head gently with a firm and sincere expression on her face. But Colin still could not believe it. He knew that if a mage became a believer of the god of light, it would cause a lot of trouble. The mages in Yevil would go crazy. "I just felt that the previous experience of escaping was too thrilling. It was as if the gods were protecting me. Therefore, I have decided to convert to the god of light." Vera's eyes were a little evasive, and there was a strange blush on her face. This female mage was obviously not good at lying, and Colin could easily see through her lies. However, he was not stupid enough to expose her lies. "You have made the right choice. The god of light deserves everyone's sincere service." Colin responded with a sincere expression on his face. At the same time, he could not help but wonder if the Duke of St. Hilda had already planned for Vera to go to Yevil to study arcane magic and then return to the northern frontier to serve the god of light. But was it really a wise move to intensify the conflict between the nobles and the mages at this time? Vera seemed to have seen through Colin's worries and she quickly explained, "Don't worry, I will not publicly announce that I have become a believer of the god of light. I do not want to cause any unnecessary trouble." Colin heaved a sigh of relief. However, he could not help but be curious about the real reason why Vera had changed her faith. Of course, Vera would not tell Colin the real reason. At least not now. She seemed to have thought of something shameful, and her little face turned red. Of course, this attracted Colin's attention. However, before Colin could ask her any questions, Vera quickly said goodbye to Colin and ran back to her tent. She looked like a frightened deer. Colin looked at Vera's back as he recalled the cute and shy look on her face. He could not help but touch his chin. Then he thought to himself, "Is my charm really that great? It must be because my face is so similar to the reader's face." After feeling proud of himself, Colin walked back to his tent. "Knight of Con." Halfway back, a voice suddenly called out to Colin. Of course, he did not respond because it was not him who had called out to him. Knight of Con. The other party called out to him again. Are you calling me? Colin turned around and saw a figure walking towards him. Of course. The person who had come was a young lady. However, the exquisite plate armor on her body, the silver sword on her waist, and the knight's boots on her feet all indicated her identity. She was a female knight. A valiant female knight. However, Colin did not recognize her. You must have mistaken me for someone else. My name is Colin. Really? The female knight showed a mysterious smile as she stood in front of Colin. The light fragrance of jasmine wafted into Colin's nose and he could not help but wonder. Was he really lucky today? Sure enough, the appearance of the Lord Reader was still too lethal to women. But in the next second, when the female knight announced her name, Colin's smug smile immediately froze on his face. My name is Cynthia. The female knight smiled deeply. Cynthia Pseudo. Chapter 32. What were the consequences of lying? Pinocchio's nose would grow longer. Vera's face would turn red. Charles. Well, for a guy like Marquis Charles, lying was as easy as eating and drinking. Colin admitted that his acting skills might not be as good as Marquis Charles's, but when he lied, it was difficult for ordinary people to see the clues. However, this did not mean that there would be no consequences for lying. Now, the consequences were here. When he heard that the female knight's surname was Pseudo, Colin finally reacted. No wonder she called him Knight of Con. When Colin sneaked into the Firefox mercenaries to hide his identity, he used Con Pseudo's alias. Now, the real Pseudo found the fake Pseudo. I think there might be some misunderstanding. Colin took half a step back, feeling a little guilty. What misunderstanding? Cynthia took a step forward and asked aggressively, My good brother, I haven't seen you for a few months and you have changed a lot. I almost didn't recognize you. Well, it turned out that this girl was Con Pseudo's sister. These days, the Black Cavalry went north and gathered a lot of scattered soldiers from the front line. The Pseudo family's Ice Stone City had long been occupied by the trolls, and the family army had long been defeated. So, it was not strange that Cynthia would appear here. What Colin found strange was how she knew that he had pretended to be her brother. There were only a few people who knew that he had used a fake identity, so someone must have told on him. For some reason, the first figure that appeared in Colin's mind was Sar. This filial son had always been at odds with him, and his thoughts were complicated and he liked to sow discord. So, Colin felt that it was very likely that this guy had instigated Cynthia to find trouble with him. Miss Cynthia, please listen to my explanation. Okay, go ahead. Actually, it's like this. Hey, why did you draw your sword? Colin was scared and stepped back. Didn't you let me say it? Yes, you can say it, but I won't listen. Cynthia held her sword with both hands and assumed a charging posture. Mother said to never trust a man who has lied to you. What nonsense. Colin suspected that there was something wrong with this woman's head. Don't come over. This is a military camp, private fights are not allowed. For the sake of the Pseudo clan's reputation, I want to duel you. Draw your swords, cried Cynthia, throwing down a white glove. I don't accept it. Colin ignored the white gloves on the floor. He couldn't understand why this woman didn't even listen to his explanation and wanted to duel. Was there such a big grudge between them? Ha, coward. I will count to 3 and then we will attack. Cynthia obviously didn't care about the military rules that forbade personal fights. These things were actually used to restrain the lower-rank soldiers. For the nobles, they were not very useful. 1. Cynthia's voice was as hard as iron. Cold sweat seeped out of Colin's forehead, and his right hand involuntarily gripped the hilt of his sword. He already understood that this woman would not listen to reason. Since she couldn't be reasoned with, he wasn't afraid of fighting. Colin had once faced the charge of nearly 1,000 wolf cavalry, and he was fearless in the front row. Now, it was just a woman, so of course, it couldn't scare him. Moreover, thanks to Archbishop Raven's holy water, Colin had already been promoted to a Tier 2 knight. At his age, Tier 2 was already quite a high standard. The crazy woman opposite him looked to be about the same age as him, so she shouldn't be more than this rank. 2. Cynthia counted again, her expression cold. Colin took a deep breath and pulled out the longsword at his waist. Then, he saw the female knight opposite him immediately turn into a golden bolt of lightning and charge towards him. Didn't you say to count to 3? Bang! Colin only felt a huge impact. It was as if he had been hit by a tank, and his entire body flew backwards. This crazy woman was probably a Tier 3 knight. The Lord of Light, illuminate the world. Cynthia still had time to chant a prayer. Coupled with the golden holy light emitted from her body, the scene was extremely Chunibyo. However, Colin didn't have time to complain because the other party slashed at him again. Clang. Colin barely managed to block it, but the huge impact made his hands numb and he almost couldn't hold the sword. My heart is holy, cleanse the evil. Cynthia's pupils had already turned pure golden, without a trace of human emotion. She was as cold as a god. Bang! Colin was sent flying by a kick. This time, he flew further and directly smashed into a nearby tent. The soldiers in the tent ran out in a panic, only to see Cynthia emitting golden light. Then, they tacitly put away the swords in their hands and obediently hid at the side to watch the battle. The two knights were fighting, so the soldiers naturally didn't dare to meddle in other people's business. Colin spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt that many of his ribs should have been broken, and the injuries that he had almost recovered from previously had relapsed. Woman, don't go too far. Of course, this little threat would not be taken seriously by Cynthia. She still resolutely raised her sword and rushed over, fearless, unparalleled. The other party's unreasonable and arrogant attitude finally angered Colin completely. Ah! Colin let out a beast-like roar. In his memory, an indescribable anger and hatred surged out and instantly dominated his will. That was a will that did not belong to Colin, did not belong to his predecessor, and did not even belong to this world. It was as if it came from the ancient abyss, crossed tens of thousands of years of time and space, and suddenly descended. The moonlight flowed and shone behind Colin. Vaguely. It was as if a terrifying shadow had appeared. It was revealing its bloody fangs and spreading its huge black wings. Cynthia's golden eyes also appeared for a moment in shock. She thought that she was hallucinating, and her forward momentum was also interrupted. But soon, she calmed her mind again, firm and devout, slash through the thorns, slashing. Colin roared and instantly erupted with an unprecedented terrifying power. He stabbed out with his sword. With a clang. The armor on Cynthia's chest was actually pierced through, and the scattered iron pieces flew everywhere. Blood dyed her shirt red, and a few buttons on her chest were also broken, revealing some beautiful scenery. However, Cynthia seemed to be completely unaware, and she was not frightened by Colin's extraordinary performance just now. She calmly steadied her body and prayed again. Firm and devout, slash through the thorns. Then she charged again. It was as if nothing could stop this woman. Colin, on the other hand, was somewhat lacking in stamina at this moment. Although the effect of the attack just now was terrifying, it actually allowed him to cross the gap of one level and suppress Cynthia. However, it also almost drained all his strength. Therefore, facing the crazy woman who charged at him again, Colin's eyes flashed with hostility. He made a decision. The long sword shone with a golden light and pierced toward Colin's chest like lightning. Colin didn't dodge at all. Cynthia looked at the long sword in her hand piercing through her opponent's chest, but her heart was filled with fear. Because Colin's sword. It was right at her throat. Chapter 33. Let go. Colin's mouth was bleeding, but his tone was calm and unyielding. The golden light in Cynthia's eyes slowly faded, and her rationality slowly returned. So, facing this man with blood-red eyes, she was afraid. Madmen were always afraid of madmen who were even crazier. So, Cynthia let go of her sword. Colin didn't care about the long sword that pierced through his chest, as if it didn't exist. Who told you that I used your brother's name? Don't you need to treat your wound first? Don't talk nonsense. Colin used a bit of force, and the long sword drew a small wound on Cynthia's throat. Dark red blood flowed down slowly. I don't want to ask a second time. Madman! Cynthia cursed in her heart. In this world dominated by men, Cynthia, as a female knight, naturally had to bear more criticism and suspicion. So, she used her crazy appearance to cover herself with a thick layer of armor. Madwoman from the Sioux duo family, the church's fanatic, bloodthirsty wild rose. Although these titles didn't sound good, they did make Cynthia untouchable in Icestone City. But now, looking at this man with a long sword in his chest and an extremely indifferent expression, Cynthia could only lower her arrogant head. Oliver. Hearing this name, Colin was stunned. It wasn't the filial son Sar? It was the fat merchant who had once hired Firefox mercenaries to escort the caravan to Fallen Eagle City. That guy actually didn't die in the Mirror Lake camp. He was really lucky. Where is he? As soon as Colin asked this question, he saw a fat figure in the crowd flashing, as if he was about to run away. Oliver, I see you. Get over here if you don't want to die. That fat figure looked as if he was struck by lightning and instantly froze in place. After struggling for a while, he finally walked over dejectedly. Speak, how did you meet this crazy woman? And why did you betray me? Oliver shook his head repeatedly. I didn't betray. Speak, Colin said sternly. Oliver was so scared that the fat on his body trembled. Finally, he began to tell the truth. It turned out that when the Mirror Lake camp was attacked, Oliver had decisively jumped into the Mirror Lake to survive. He wasn't a good swimmer. However, he had a lot of fat on him. It was common knowledge that fat was less dense than water. Therefore, it was very easy for fat people to float on the water. Oliver floated in the lake for 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, when he was about to faint from hunger, he reached the shore. At this time, the Troll's main force had already left Mirror Lake. Therefore, Oliver managed to avoid a calamity. Then, he ran into another wave of deserters and ran south with them. Along the way, they met Cynthia, who was rushing over from Fallen Eagle City to provide support. When Cynthia heard that the Black Cavalry was heading north, she borrowed a few hundred men from her uncle, Count Amon, to provide support. Actually, after the death of Viscount Suduo, his first successor, the guy that Colin had once impersonated, Consuduo, should have led the army to retake Icestone City. This way, the Suduo family would be able to regain their title and glory. However, not everyone could regain their confidence after a crushing defeat and once again step into the bloody and cruel battlefield. Knight of Khan was clearly a guy who was scared out of his wits. Therefore, he could only rely on his sister, Cynthia Suduo, to lead the army. However, the Suduo family's army had been defeated long ago. Count Amon obviously couldn't lend all his forces to the Suduo family. Giving his niece a few hundred soldiers was already quite generous. Therefore, Cynthia, who was extremely short on troops, naturally wouldn't let Oliver's group of deserters go. She took them in without any explanation and forced them to continue fighting for the Suduo family. Strictly speaking, her actions were illegal. However, the Suduo family's territory was gone, so how could Cynthia care about this? Moreover, she was a crazy person in the first place. However, Oliver was in trouble. He had finally escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield, but now he was being forced to do something beyond his ability. Already traumatized, he didn't want to be cannon fodder anymore. Therefore, Oliver found Cynthia and wanted to persuade her to let him go. He had some confidence in this. After all, he felt that he and the first successor of the Suduo family, Knight of Khan, were old acquaintances who had gone through trials and tribulations together. However, when Cynthia saw this merchant who claimed to have traveled with her brother to Fallen Eagle City, she immediately exposed him. The real Khan Suduo had fled to Fallen Eagle City with her, so how could he be related to a merchant group? Cynthia obviously felt that this was a lie. Poor Oliver was given a good thrashing, and then he behaved himself. However, after Cynthia led her army to meet up with the Black Cavalry, Oliver saw a glimmer of hope. This was because he saw an old acquaintance among the logisticians of the Black Cavalry, the filial son Sar. From Sar's words, Oliver finally understood why he was beaten up by Cynthia. This was because that Knight of Caen was actually a fake. Oliver felt aggrieved, but he didn't dare to say anything. After all, as a commoner, how could he report a noble? However, under the urging of Sar, who wanted the world to be in chaos, Oliver still confessed everything to Cynthia. He claimed that the one who lied was not him, but Colin. However, Cynthia wouldn't easily believe a commoner. In her opinion, the knight Colin was a noble, so why would he pretend to be her brother? The Sue-Duo family was now on the verge of collapse, so what was the benefit of pretending to be their successor? In the face of Cynthia's questioning, Oliver panicked. He also couldn't understand why Colin would lie. In a moment of desperation, he suddenly remembered that he had promised Colin that he would help him build a bridge and use the Tulip Merchant Guild's financial resources to recruit soldiers for the Sue-Duo family and retake Icestone City. At the time, Colin didn't agree. Of course, he didn't object either. Since he didn't object, then it was basically the same as agreeing. Therefore, Oliver decided to stick to the idea of sacrificing friends rather than oneself and told Cynthia that Colin had pretended to be the successor of the Sue-Duo family in order to cheat the Tulip Merchant Guild of their financial support. This seemed to be the only reasonable explanation. Thus, Cynthia was furious. Someone actually dared to use the Sue-Duo family's name to cheat outsiders. Now that the Sue-Duo family had fallen to the point that they only had a name left, Cynthia naturally couldn't let this name be tarnished. After she had Oliver identify Colin from the camp, she took advantage of the fact that he was alone to come cause trouble. After listening to Oliver's explanation of the cause and effect of the matter, Colin felt a burst of anger in his heart. As expected, his guess wasn't wrong. It was Sar who had interfered in the matter. Colin glared fiercely at Cynthia. "I can tell you clearly that there was a reason for using your brother's name, and I have never used the Sue-Duo family's name to scheme anything. Now that I have suffered a blow from you, let's call it a day." After saying this, Colin withdrew the long sword that was pressed against Cynthia's throat. Cynthia snorted coldly and turned around to leave. This crazy woman seemed to be very unconvinced. However, this matter was originally Colin's fault, so he couldn't do anything to Cynthia. However, Colin didn't plan to let Sar and Oliver off so easily. So, Colin turned to Oliver and ordered, "Go find Sar and bring him to see me. Tell him not to think about running away, otherwise he will have to bear the consequences." "Okay, but your injury?" Oliver looked at the long sword on Colin's chest and was secretly shocked. "I'm fine." As soon as Colin's voice fell, he heard Vera's anxious voice. "Colin! Colin, what's wrong with you?" It seemed that the commotion here had alarmed the female mage. At this time, Knight Colin, who was still as steady as Mount Tai, suddenly became shaky. He pressed his chest hard and screamed with a slightly exaggerated expression, "It can't be." Then he fell down. But the timing of his fall was quite coincidental, and he just fell into the arms of Vera, who was rushing over. When he felt the familiar soft touch, Colin spat out a mouthful of blood. "Quick! Go find Archbishop Raven, holy water." Vera had a tearful expression on her face, but the Archbishop has already used up the holy water last time. Colin. Chapter 34. The spring sun was shining brightly and there were no clouds in the sky. The little farce last night did not have much of an impact on the army. As soon as the sky brightened, the army set off as usual and continued to chase the traces of the trolls to the north. Of course, the word chase was not very appropriate. This was because the speed of the Black Cavalry was too slow. Colin always felt that Marquis Garcia seemed to be deliberately waiting for something. Moreover, at such a slow speed, the troll army had probably already retreated from the northern frontier. Perhaps this was Marquis Garcia's plan? Win without a fight? Although he was full of doubts, Colin did not dare to question the supreme commander of the Black Cavalry. Moreover, here, and even in the entire northern frontier, no one dared to question Marquis Garcia's military orders. At the rear of the army, Colin once again lay down on the flatbed trailer that he had just left. In fact, his injury this time looked very scary, but it was not dangerous at all. Vera, on the other hand, was quite frightened. She once again looked for Archbishop Raven and asked him to personally cast a healing spell on Colin. The healing spell cast by the Archbishop was indeed very effective. After only one night, Colin could already feel that his wound was itching and showing signs of healing. However, he was not too happy. After all, what he wanted was not the healing spell, but the holy water. Unfortunately, the Archbishop had really run out of holy water. Sigh, it was a waste of a good show. It seemed that he would have to find a way to get some holy water from the church in the future. After all, compared to the blood of a high-ranking knight, pure holy water was relatively easier to obtain, although it was rare. Moreover, it was safe and stable without any risks. Just as Colin was lying on the trailer and began to have ideas about the church, Oliver quickly rushed over and reported, "Sir Colin, he ran away?" Colin glanced at the sweaty fatty, and a sinister look flashed across his face. If Sar really dared to run away, then Colin would definitely label him as a deserter so that he wouldn't be able to survive in the northern frontier. No, he didn't run. Could it be that he dares not to come? This time, Colin was a little surprised. A mere mercenary dared to disobey the orders of a noble? Just as Colin was about to order Raymond to slaughter that filial son, he heard Oliver shake his head. No, Sar has already joined the Sioux Duo family's team. And when I asked Knight Cynthia for the person, sheech. What did she say? Colin's voice was cold. Oliver shrank back and whispered, "She said, you don't have the right to order the people of the Sioux Duo clan, he. Colin's face turned green. This filial son could see the situation clearly. He actually managed to latch onto another thick thigh so quickly. And that crazy woman from the Sioux Duo clan, it looked like she really planned to fight Colin to the end. Taking a deep breath, Colin calmed himself down. He felt that he didn't need to be anxious. The Sioux Duo clan that had lost their fief was just yesterday's flower. How long could that crazy woman protect Sar? Sooner or later, Colin would send that filial son to hell to reunite with his father. But this time, Colin seemed to have miscalculated. Because in just a few days, Ice Stone City was reclaimed by the Sioux Duo clan. Moreover, the entire reclaiming process was unbelievably simple. When the Black Guards slowly made their way north, they discovered that not only did they not encounter any troll armies along the way, the trolls had even completely abandoned the cities that they had once occupied. Yes, completely abandoned. The troll soldiers had all left as if they had never been there. And so, the fleeing lords and nobles that Black Cavalry had gathered along the way were instantly energized. They led their defeated soldiers and killed their way back into the empty cities, announcing that they had reclaimed their lost territories. Because Black Cavalry was maintaining order. There was no fighting over territory. The lords all tacitly only led their armies into their original fiefs and didn't steal anyone else's cities. There were even a few clans whose heirs had all died, and no one dared to take over their territories. After all, the victory this time was completely built on Black Cavalry's reputation. The other lords were just following behind Black Cavalry to take advantage of the situation. If they still didn't know what was good for them and took over something that didn't belong to them, then Marquis Garcia wouldn't be polite to them. In the eyes of the lords, those ownerless fiefs naturally had to be handed over to Marquis Garcia to deal with. So, no matter how much Colin gritted his teeth and cursed the Sioux Duo clan's bullshit luck, Cynthia had reclaimed Ice Stone City without shedding a drop of blood. The revival of the Sioux Duo clan seemed to be in sight. Afterwards, Black Cavalry set up camp on the outskirts of Ice Stone City. Ice Stone City was the largest city closest to the Sky Ice Plains in the northeastern region of the northern frontier. Marquis Garcia seemed to be preparing to stay here for a long time and didn't have any intentions of continuing north to attack the trolls. Cynthia, who had reclaimed Ice Stone City, was feeling proud of her success. She immediately invited Marquis Garcia and the other nobles into Ice Stone City and announced that a banquet would be held 3 days later to celebrate this great victory. Colin also received an invitation to the banquet, But he felt that the crazy woman didn't have any intentions of letting bygones be bygones. Although it couldn't be considered a banquet at Hongmen, Colin felt that Cynthia definitely wouldn't let him have an easy time at the banquet. Of course, Colin wouldn't be scared. He really wanted to see what kind of program that crazy woman had arranged for him. He hoped that it wouldn't disappoint him. Oliver. Colin put down the banquet invitation in his hand and called out. Sir, what orders do you have? For the past few days, Oliver had been ordered around by Colin like a servant. It could be considered his punishment for revealing Colin's secret of using a fake identity. I need a set of formal attire for the banquet. Do you know which tailor shop in Ice Stone City can make it? Colin had snuck out this time by hiding his identity, so he naturally wouldn't bring something like formal attire with him. Hearing this, Oliver hurriedly put on a flattering smile. Sir Colin, our Tulip Merchant Guild has a branch in Ice Stone City. There are definitely excellent tailors there who can make a beautiful formal attire for you. Colin looked at Oliver with a smile that wasn't a smile, but didn't say anything. Until the fat merchant felt his hair stand on end and sweat appeared on his forehead. All right, then let's go to the place you mentioned. Oliver let out a long sigh of relief. Ever since he saw the viciousness Colin displayed in his battle with Cynthia that night, Oliver was especially afraid of this heir to the title of Baron. Even though Oliver had faced other nobles with higher titles before, no one had been able to give him such a strong sense of oppression. When Colin didn't immediately agree to Oliver's suggestion, he immediately realized that he had said the wrong thing. That was because the Tulip Merchant Guild was Oliver's territory. When he suggested going there to find a tailor, it was obvious that he wanted to take the opportunity to break away from Colin's control. However, Colin had agreed. This made Oliver even more anxious. The banquet was in 3 days. Time was tight, so the two didn't delay and immediately went to the Tulip Merchant Guild's branch that Oliver had mentioned. Chapter 35. The Tulip Chamber of Commerce's outpost in Ice Stone City was located in the center of the east side of the city. This outpost occupied a large area and was quite luxurious. Your Tulip Chamber of Commerce has developed quite well here. You flatter me. Oliver could not hide his happiness. This place is very close to the Sky Icefield. Most of our transactions with the trolls come from Ice Stone City, so this place is actually second only to the Chamber of Commerce's headquarters. That's right. Although the northern frontier and the trolls were fighting each other to the death, the trade between the two sides had never stopped. War was war, trade was trade. These were two different things. After all, the benefits involved were too great. Even the nobles of the northern frontier were unwilling to stop their trade with the trolls. Of course, not just any merchant had the qualifications to engage in this kind of foreign trade. For the Tulip Chamber of Commerce to be able to get a share of the profits, they clearly had some background. Where is your Chamber of Commerce's headquarters? Fallen Eagle City. Oliver said the name of a city that Colin was very familiar with. Wasn't Fallen Eagle City the city where Colin's sister had married off? And the lord of that city was Earl Amon. So the Tulip Chamber of Commerce's background was actually him. Colin's expression was somewhat amused. He had always suspected that the assassination attempt on him was instigated by this Count Amon. Since the great noble behind the Tulip Chamber of Commerce could also be Count Amon, then wouldn't it be throwing himself into a trap by following Oliver into the other party's sphere of influence? However, Colin was not too worried. Count Amon would not be stupid enough to assassinate a baron's successor within his sphere of influence. That way, he would not be able to escape responsibility. Sir Oliver, it's great that you're all right. I heard that you went to the Mirror Lake main camp, I thought. Just as he entered, a little girl with a face full of freckles shouted excitedly at Oliver. Oliver nodded reservedly. Of course I'm fine. Go find Jack. There's a lord who needs his help making a banquet dress. The freckled girl looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, Sir Oliver. Mr. Jack was summoned into the castle by the Sioux Duo family, saying that he wanted to design dresses for the lords attending the banquet. Oliver was stunned. He turned around and said to Colin, Sir Colin, I didn't expect that the Sioux Duo family had already arranged it. I believe that you will soon be invited to the castle to have your measurements taken. Really? Colin sneered. He didn't think that the crazy woman would be so kind as to ask someone to make a suit for him. He even had a hunch that this was Cynthia's way of getting back at him. Thinking of this, Colin asked the freckled girl, "Do you know how many tailors the Sue Duo family has hired to the castle?" "I heard that all the slightly famous tailors in the city have been recruited. Many of the adults who attended the banquet this time didn't seem to have brought their formal attire because they were in a hurry. That's why the Sue Duo family is preparing to rush it." True enough. This time, Colin was finally convinced that the crazy woman most likely wanted him to make a fool of himself over the issue of his formal attire. Seeing that Colin was silent, the freckled girl kindly suggested, "Sir, if you need to make a formal attire, Mr. Jack's apprentice is still in the shop. He may be able to help you." "Apprentice?" Before Colin could speak, Oliver scolded loudly, "Let that clumsy guy make a formal attire for a noble? Are you out of your mind?" The freckled girl shrank her head and didn't dare to speak. Colin wouldn't feel at ease leaving the production of formal attire to a tailor's apprentice. Of course, he wouldn't go to the Sue Duo family's castle to beg that crazy woman. So, how could he find a suitable formal attire in such a short time? Colin rubbed his chin. After thinking for a while, he suddenly asked, "Do you sell armor in your shop?" "Of course." Oliver hurriedly said loudly, "Please come with me." Colin followed Oliver to a room. At a glance, there were all kinds of armors. "Sir, these are the finest items collected by our Chamber of Commerce. There are plate armors, chain armors, and even enchanted armors." "There are enchanted armors?" Colin was suddenly interested. The so-called enchantment was the method of carving a magic circle on the surface of the armor and asking a mage to enchant the magic circle so that the armor would have various arcane characteristics. This wasn't a simple matter. First of all, to carve the complex magic circle on the armor required an extremely high level of forging skills. Secondly, the price of enchantment by a mage was also extremely expensive. Therefore, an enchanted armor could often be sold at a sky-high price. The armor that Colin had left in the Kingdom of Grey Castle was not enchanted. The only set of enchanted armor in the Angeli family was of course worn by his father. Unfortunately, that set of enchanted armor had died in battle with his father and should have become the troll's spoils of war. Therefore, Colin excitedly followed Oliver's lead and came to the only set of enchanted armor in the room. This was a set of pure white armor, carved with beautiful and mysterious lines that emitted a faint icy aura. This set of armor is enchanted with the rank 4 magic circle, Frost Blessing. When attacked, it can explode with frost and cause damage to the attacker. Oliver explained at the side. A rank 4 magic circle. Colin remembered that the set of enchanted armor passed down in the Angeli family only had a rank 2 magic circle carved on it. How much is this set of enchanted armor? Colin was tempted. Oliver turned back and muttered to an old blacksmith for a moment before giving a sky-high price. 50,000 gold coins. How much? Colin had a face of disbelief. One had to know that the entire Angeli family's annual tax revenue was only 3,000 gold coins. In other words, even if the Angeli family did not eat or drink for 10 years, they would still not be able to afford this set of armor. It was no wonder that the rank 2 enchanted armor of the Angeli family was treated as a family heirloom. Colin reluctantly looked at the set of enchanted armor, then decisively turned around. This was not something he could afford. Even if he sold everything he had, he would not be able to afford to maintain it. "How about this set?" Colin asked as he changed into another set of armor without enchantments. "This set is 2,000 gold coins." Colin took a deep breath, feeling a little pained. However, he also knew that this kind of exquisite armor would not be cheap. "Can I pay a deposit first? I will inform Grey Castle to send the rest of the money." Hearing this, Oliver thought for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying, "Sir Colin, if you like this set of armor, I can give it to you for free." "For free?" Colin smiled playfully. He did not believe that there were free things in this world. Everything had a price, it was just that some prices did not appear in the form of money. "That's right. Oliver said in a deep voice, I previously accidentally destroyed your relationship with the Sioux Duo family and caused you to be injured. Therefore, this set of armor is my apology to you. Sure enough, after returning to the Tulip Chamber of Commerce, this fatty began to think of ways to get out of Colin's control. This set of free armor was actually Oliver's redemption fee. Good. I'll accept your apology. Seeing that Oliver's apology was sincere, Colin decided not to pursue the previous matter. Then, he found a pen and paper and drew a roaring bear head with some thorny patterns on the back of the eagle shield emblem. Help me engrave the Angeli family's emblem and send it to my residence within 3 days. Okay. After finishing his instructions, Colin was ready to get up and leave. Sir Colin, about the dress for the banquet? Oliver kindly reminded him. I already have a way to deal with the dress, you don't have to worry about it. Colin turned around and revealed an unfathomable smile. Chapter 36. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. The Sioux Duo family's banquet arrived as scheduled. As night fell, the front of the castle in the center of Ice Stone City was bustling with activity. Many nobles had gathered to attend the banquet. It had to be said that Cynthia Sioux Duo's timing was ingenious. Originally, with the Sioux Duo family's influence, it was impossible to invite such a large number of nobles to attend the banquet. However, at this time, the troll army had retreated from the northern frontier, and the lost castles were easily recovered. Although it was somewhat self-deceiving, it could still be considered a victory. Moreover, the only 2 marquises in the northern frontier were coincidentally in Ice Stone City. Under these circumstances, unless the Duke of St. Hilda personally hosted the banquet in cold winter, Ice Stone City was destined to become the focal point of the northern frontier tonight. The banquet started at 6, and Colin arrived at 5:30. He had come alone. This was a high-class banquet for nobles, so it was naturally impossible for the guests to bring in commoner attendants. The knight Raymond originally had the qualifications to attend, but he had already been sent back to Grey Castle Town by Colin to report the news. Colin felt that he was now someone who could establish a relationship with the 2 heirs of the House of St. Hilda, so Count Aldman wouldn't dare to be too presumptuous. Therefore, he didn't need to cower in the dark anymore. Thus, he sent Raymond back to report to prevent the family from thinking that he was dead and causing trouble. Apologies, sir, please show me your invitation. When the guard at the castle's entrance saw Colin, his expression immediately became very interesting, and he hurriedly stopped him to ask. Colin took out his invitation and handed it to the guard. The guard hurriedly took it and carefully checked it. After confirming that there was no mistake, he could only let him go. Apologies, Sir Knight Colin, for the trouble. Welcome to the banquet. Please enter. Only then did Colin slowly enter the castle. Along the way, when everyone saw him, they all looked at him with astonishment. Many even secretly pointed at him and whispered about something. Colin didn't care about these gazes at all, and continued to walk towards the banquet hall with his head held high. Sir Knight, please wait a moment. Unfortunately, he was still stopped by the Sioux Duo family's steward at the entrance of the hall. The butler recognized the badge of the Angeli family at a glance, so he smiled and said, You must be Knight Colin, right? Colin crossed his arms in front of his chest, wondering if he should smash the fake smile on the butler's face with a punch. Perhaps the butler had heard of Colin's reputation, or perhaps he sensed danger, but the butler took a step back and said, I'm sorry, Knight Colin, but you can't wear your armor to this banquet. Yes, Colin couldn't find any formal attire, so he simply wore the armor that he had just bought. Logically speaking, this was indeed quite rude. However, Colin was already prepared. He calmly asked, Then what should I wear? Of course you should wear formal attire. The butler looked at her as if she was looking at a fool. He even began to use his eyes to signal the guards next to him, preparing to chase this rude knight out of the castle. Formal attire? Colin sneered. Suddenly, he smashed his fist on his breastplate and shouted, The Northern Territory has just suffered a great humiliation. The troll army has just retreated, and they're returning unscathed with a bountiful harvest. You all still have the mood to dress up and sing and dance? What about our counterattack? What about our revenge? What about our courage? Why didn't we do anything? I'm just a small knight, I don't have the right to question your decisions. But I feel sorry for my father, Baron Angeli, who died in the front lines. As his only son, I swear that I won't take off my armor if I don't take revenge. The whole hall was silent. Colin's righteous words seemed to have pressed the pause button on the scene. Everyone stared at this strange person who came to the banquet in armor, dumbfounded. Especially the old butler of the Su Duo family. Until now, his brain was still buzzing. He didn't know if he was shocked by Colin's loud voice, or shocked by what he said. At this time, he also knew that he couldn't chase this rude knight out of the castle according to his original plan. Colin was indeed rude, but he had the moral high ground. Strictly speaking, this banquet did have the taste of whitewashing the peace. But this wasn't because the previous defeat was too sudden, and the giant demon army's retreat was too unexpected. So, those lords and nobles who easily recovered their lost land urgently needed a chance to cover up their previous failures and announce their current victory. So, this banquet to celebrate the victory was promoted by all parties. But they didn't expect that now, someone would stand up and ruthlessly tear this false mask of victory and smash it heavily on the faces of the nobles. Cynthia Su Duo was also in the crowd. She wanted to see the ugly state of Colin, this annoying guy, being chased out of the castle, but she didn't expect that she would see this scene. Cynthia almost clenched her silver teeth, but at the same time, a trace of regret appeared in her heart. This banquet was originally an excellent opportunity for the Su Duo family to become famous, but now, it seemed to have become a joke. It was all because of one person, a person who was originally insignificant, a person she wanted to humiliate with some small tricks. Perhaps she shouldn't have done so. Colin didn't know that the crazy woman Cynthia was also watching him, and he still had that awe-inspiring righteousness. He ignored the gazes from the surroundings and strode forward as if no one was around. Bang! The old butler, who was still in a daze, was knocked down by Colin. But he didn't dare to stop him. He watched as Colin, wearing the pure white armor, walked into the banquet hall. Many nobles who were attending the banquet had already gathered in the hall. When they saw Colin's figure walking into the hall, everyone had different expressions, whispering to each other and discussing. Obviously, Colin's loud voice had already spread those bold words into the banquet hall. So, he naturally became the temporary focus of the banquet. However, no one came forward to greet him. Obviously, Colin was isolated. But he didn't care at all. His heart was even filled with joy. After all, this was the banquet that crazy woman had tried every means to plan. She wanted to make a name for the Su Duo family, but now, it seemed to have been completely destroyed by Colin's words. There was still some time before the banquet officially began. Therefore, the nobles attending the banquet were still arriving one after another. The newcomers clearly felt that the atmosphere in the hall seemed to be a little wrong. After asking around, they found out that it was Colin's doing. Therefore, more and more gazes were cast at Colin. Colin also felt a little annoyed and simply closed his eyes. As time passed, the status of the newcomers became higher and higher, until Marquis Charles appeared at the entrance of the hall. Then, the banquet suddenly fell silent again. This wasn't because Marquis Charles had a high prestige among the nobles. On the contrary, due to the series of previous defeats, his reputation among the nobles of the northern frontier was very bad. But his appearance still made the entire hall fall silent again. Because he was also wearing a suit of armor. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.